Blood dripped from Mila Carter's broken arm as she stumbled out of the emergency room at 3 a.m., her stepfather's rage still echoing in her bones. She thought the worst was behind her, until a black SUV rolled to a stop beside her, and the most dangerous man in the city stepped out. Lorenzo Moretti didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. One look at her shattered wrist, one whispered confession, and her stepfather's fate was sealed. By dawn, everything Mila knew would be gone. Her safety, her freedom, her carefully invisible life. If you want to see where this story takes you, hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Mila's journey reaches across the world. The fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial Hospital burned with the kind of sterile brightness that made everything look worse than it was. Mila Carter had worked under those lights for 3 years, long enough to know that the harsh illumination revealed every bruise, every broken bone, every secret people tried to hide. Tonight, she was the one hiding. Mila, for the last time, let me see the x-rays. Doctor. Sarah Chen stood with her arms crossed, her dark eyes sharp, with the kind of concern that made Mila's chest tighten. They'd been friends since nursing school, which meant Sarah knew exactly when Mila was lying, and Mila was definitely lying. It's just a fracture, Mila said, cradling her left arm against her chest. The temporary splint did nothing to dull the throbbing pain that radiated from her wrist to her shoulder. I slipped on the stairs at home. Black ice. You know how treacherous the steps get this time of year? It was March. The ice had melted weeks ago. Sarah's expression said she knew it too. Mila, I need to get home. Mila stood abruptly, swaying slightly as exhaustion and pain crashed over her in waves. Her shift had ended 2 hours ago, but she'd stayed late finishing charts, avoiding the inevitable. Thank you for the splint. I'll follow up with orthopedics next week. You're lying to me. Sarah's voice dropped low, the way it did when she was treating a frightened child in the oncology ward. Gentle, but unyielding. Someone hurt you. Was it him? Your stepfather? Mila's throat constricted. The careful wall she'd built around the truth trembled, threatening to collapse. She thought of Thomas Carter waiting at home, probably passed out drunk on the couch by now, his rage spent after he'd shoved her down the basement stairs for questioning why he'd stolen money from her wallet again. Sarah, please, I just need to go home. That's not a home, Mila. That's a prison. The words hit harder than Thomas's hands ever had. Mila blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. She'd survived 24 years by being invisible, by not making waves, by accepting that some things couldn't be changed. Her mother had married Thomas when Mila was 12, and he'd made their lives hell ever since. After her mother died 2 years ago, Mila should have left, should have run. But grief had roots that grew deep and tangled, wrapping around your ankles until you couldn't remember how to move forward. I'll be fine, Mila whispered. I always am. She walked out before Sarah could stop her, pushing through the emergency room doors into the frigid Chicago night. The March wind cut through her thin scrubs and jacket, carrying the smell of exhaust and late winter rain. The parking lot stretched before her, nearly empty at 3 a.m., her beat-up Honda Civic waiting in the far corner under a flickering streetlight. Mila had parked there on purpose, the darkest spot, the place where no one would see her cry. She made it halfway across the lot before the tears came, hot and bitter, against her frozen cheeks. The pain in her arm pulsed with each heartbeat, a relentless reminder of Thomas's shouted accusations, his whiskey-soaked breath, the moment when his hands had found her shoulders and shoved. You're just like your mother. Worthless. Ungrateful. Taking up space in my house. Except it wasn't his house. The modest 2-bedroom on the south side had belonged to Mila's mother, passed down from Mila's grandmother. Thomas had simply moved in and claimed it like he claimed everything else, through intimidation and violence. Mila fumbled in her purse for her keys with her good hand, her vision blurred by tears and exhaustion. She didn't hear the vehicle approach until it was too late. The black SUV rolled to a stop directly in front of her, blocking her path to the Honda. It was the kind of vehicle that cost more than Mila would make in 5 years, all tinted windows and gleaming chrome, utterly silent despite its massive size. The engine purred like a satisfied predator. Mila froze. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs had turned to stone. The rear passenger door opened, and a man stepped out with the fluid grace of someone who had never questioned his right to command any space he entered. He was tall, easily 6'3", with the kind of build that came from discipline rather than vanity. His black suit was perfectly tailored, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb the streetlight rather than reflect it. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so intensely green they seemed to glow in the darkness. Mila knew who he was. Everyone in Chicago knew who he was. Lorenzo Moretti. The name spoken in whispers, never in daylight. The man who controlled half the city's underground operations, smuggling, gambling, protection. The king of Chicago's Italian Mafia, whose word was law and whose enemies simply disappeared. And he was looking directly at her. "You're hurt." His voice was low and measured, with the faintest trace of an Italian accent softening the consonants. Not a question, an observation. Mila's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm fine." "You're not." Lorenzo moved closer, and Mila caught the scent of expensive cologne and something darker, gunpowder maybe, or blood. "Your arm is broken. You've been crying, and you're afraid." "I need to get home." The words came out shakier than Mila intended. "Who hurt you?" The question was so direct, so utterly devoid of preamble, that Mila's carefully constructed lies crumbled. She stared at this dangerous stranger, at the cold intelligence in those green eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. "No one," she whispered. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Disappointment maybe, or recognition. He'd heard lies before, probably told 1,000 of his own. "I'm going to ask you one more time, Nurse Carter." The fact that he knew her name should have terrified her. It didn't. "Who hurt you?" Mila's breath caught. The parking lot seemed to shrink until there was nothing but this man and the weight of his question. In the distance, an ambulance siren wailed. A car alarm chirped, the normal sounds of a city that never truly slept. "My stepfather." The confession tore itself free before Mila could stop it. "Thomas Carter. He pushed me down the stairs because I asked him to stop stealing my money." Lorenzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He raised one hand, and immediately 2 men emerged from the SUV. They were built like brick walls, their suits struggling to contain shoulders that looked like they could break down doors. "Address," Lorenzo said to Mila. "What?" "Your address, Nurse Carter. Where does Thomas Carter live?" Mila's mind reeled. "I don't understand." "You will," Lorenzo gestured to his men. "Take her home, collect her belongings. Mr. Carter and I need to have a conversation about how men should treat women." "No." Mila stepped backward, panic surging through her veins. "No, please. If you hurt him, it'll only make things worse. He won't do anything." Lorenzo's voice cut through her protests like a blade through silk. "After tonight, Thomas Carter will never touch you again. You have my word." "Why?" The question burst from Mila's lips. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." For the first time, Lorenzo's expression softened. It was subtle, a slight relaxation around his eyes, a shift in the set of his mouth, but it transformed his entire face. He looked almost human. "I knew your mother," he said quietly. "Elena Russo. Before she became Elena Carter. Before she married that waste of oxygen currently drinking himself to death in her house." Mila's world tilted sideways. "You knew my mother?" 12 years ago, she saved my life." Lorenzo's gaze drifted past Mila, focusing on some distant memory. "I was shot during a territorial dispute, left for dead in an alley off Ashland Avenue. Your mother found me on her way home from her nursing shift. She could have walked away, called the police, let me bleed out. Instead, she stopped the bleeding and called a doctor she trusted, a doctor who understood discretion." Mila's throat had gone completely dry. Her mother had never mentioned this, never spoken about saving a mobster's life. Before she left me at the doctor's office, she made me promise something. Lorenzo's eyes returned to Mila's face, and the intensity there was almost unbearable. She said, "I have a daughter, 12 years old, brown hair, her father's eyes. If anything ever happens to me, if she ever needs help, you find her. You protect her." I gave her my word. And I never break my word. Tears streamed down Mila's cheeks now, hot and relentless. She never told me. She was protecting you from my world, from the knowledge that she'd tied your safety to a man like me. Lorenzo pulled a white handkerchief from his pocket and held it out. When Mila didn't take it, he gently dried her tears himself, his touch surprisingly careful. But Elena is gone now, and you're standing in a parking lot at 3 a.m. with a broken arm and nowhere safe to go. So I'm keeping my promise. I can't just leave, Mila protested weakly. My job, my apartment. You rent a room in a house owned by Thomas Carter. You work 16-hour shifts to avoid going home. You eat one meal a day because he steals your grocery money. Lorenzo's voice remained gentle, but the words were ruthless in their accuracy. That's not a life, Nurse Carter. That's survival. And you deserve better. One of Lorenzo's men, a mountain of muscle with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, opened the SUV's rear door. Boss, we should move. Too exposed here. Lorenzo nodded, then turned back to Mila. You have a choice. You can get in the car, let my men collect your belongings, and come to my estate where you'll be safe while your arm heals. Or you can walk to your Honda, drive home to Thomas Carter, and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. It wasn't really a choice. Mila had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to survive was to recognize when you'd run out of options. She climbed into the SUV. The interior smelled like leather and wealth, all polished wood accents and climate-controlled air. Lorenzo slid in beside her while his men took the front seats. The engine purred to life, and suddenly they were moving through Chicago's empty streets with the smooth efficiency of a shark through dark water. 2847 South Carpenter Street, Mila whispered, giving them the address. Second floor. My room is the one on the right. Everything I own fits in 2 suitcases. Lorenzo pulled out his phone and sent a rapid text. My men will be discreet. Your neighbors won't see anything. What are you going to do to Thomas? The question hung in the air between them. Lorenzo turned to face her fully, and Mila saw something ancient and cold in those green eyes. Something that had witnessed terrible things and emerged unchanged. I'm going to explain why he's leaving Chicago tonight, Lorenzo said calmly. I'm going to make it very clear what will happen if he ever contacts you again. And then I'm going to arrange transportation to a city of his choosing, along with enough money to start over somewhere far from here. He'll accept these terms because the alternative is significantly less pleasant. You're not going to kill him. Mila was surprised to hear the certainty in her own voice. Lorenzo's lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a different man. No, your mother made me promise to protect you, not to become a murderer on your behalf. Besides, death is quick. Exile is eternal. Thomas Carter will spend the rest of his life knowing he lost everything because he raised his hand to the wrong woman. The SUV glided through the south side, past shuttered shops and empty playgrounds, through neighborhoods that looked different in the dark. Mila watched her city blur past the tinted windows and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or the first real choice she'd made in years. Why were you at the hospital tonight? She asked suddenly. At 3 a.m. in the parking lot. That wasn't a coincidence. Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. I've had someone watching you for the past 6 months, making sure you were safe. When my man reported that you entered the emergency room as a patient rather than a nurse, I knew something had happened. I was already on my way when you walked out. Mila should have been outraged at the invasion of privacy. Instead, she felt something else entirely. A strange, complicated gratitude. For 6 months, someone had been watching over her, making sure she was okay, caring about her welfare in a way no one had since her mother died. That's incredibly invasive, she said, but there was no heat in it. Yes, Lorenzo agreed simply. It is. I won't apologize for it. The SUV turned onto Lakeshore Drive, heading north away from Mila's neighborhood. The skyline rose before them, a forest of glass and steel reflecting the pre-dawn darkness. They drove in silence for several minutes, the only sound the whisper of tires on pavement. Where's your estate? Mila finally asked. Kenilworth, North Shore. Lorenzo gestured vaguely toward the windshield. 40 minutes from the city, private, secure. You'll have your own room, your own space, A doctor will see you tomorrow morning to properly set the fracture. I have to work. My shift starts at 3 tomorrow afternoon. You're taking medical leave. I'll arrange it with the hospital administration. Mila's exhaustion was giving way to irritation. You can't just rearrange my entire life. I can. I am. Lorenzo's tone remained maddeningly calm. You need 6 weeks for that fracture to heal. During that time, you'll stay at the estate, recover properly, and decide what you want to do next. After 6 weeks, if you want to return to your own apartment, which I'll help you secure, and your job, you're free to leave. But you will not go back to Thomas Carter's house. That chapter of your life is over. The certainty in his voice was almost hypnotic. Mila found herself nodding, even as part of her brain screamed that this was insane. You didn't just climb into a car with a mafia boss and let him dictate your future. Except that was exactly what she was doing. I don't understand why you're doing this, Mila said quietly. A promise to my mother doesn't explain all of this. The surveillance, the immediate intervention, the complete upheaval of my life. There has to be something more. Lorenzo turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the SUV, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. Your mother saw me at my worst, bleeding, desperate, vulnerable, and she chose kindness. In my world, Nurse Carter, kindness is rarer than diamonds and more valuable than gold. She asked only one thing in return, that I keep you safe. It's the easiest promise I've ever kept. The SUV exited onto a private road lined with massive estates set back from the street behind gates and hedges. Old money lived here, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. At the end of a long driveway, wrought iron gates swung open to reveal a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been transplanted directly from the Italian countryside. Stone and stucco gleamed in the landscape lighting, surrounding perfectly manicured gardens that must look stunning in daylight. Tall windows glowed with warm light, and Mila could see the shadowy shapes of staff moving inside even at this early hour. This is your home? She breathed. One of them. Lorenzo's expression was unreadable. I hope you'll be comfortable here. The SUV stopped at the front entrance, where a woman in her 50s waited at the top of the marble steps. She was elegant and composed, with steel-gray hair pulled into a neat bun and kind eyes that took in Mila's appearance with immediate understanding. This is Maria Delgado, Lorenzo said as he helped Mila from the vehicle with his good hand carefully supporting her uninjured arm. She manages the household staff. Anything you need, she'll provide. Maria descended the steps and took Mila's good hand in both of hers. Welcome, Miss Carter. I've prepared the East Guest Suite for you. Let's get you settled and comfortable. You look exhausted. Mila was beyond exhaustion. She'd entered some strange realm where reality had become fluid and nothing made sense anymore. She followed Maria into the mansion, through a foyer with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, up a sweeping staircase with a carved wooden banister that felt like silk under her palm. The East Guest Suite was larger than Mila's entire room at Thomas's house. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the space, dressed in soft linens that looked like clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens, currently dark but promising beauty in daylight. An ensuite bathroom featured a clawfoot tub and separate shower, all marble and gold fixtures. Your belongings will arrive within the hour, Maria said gently. I've laid out some night clothes for you, and there's tea on the nightstand if you'd like something warm. The doctor will visit at 9 o'clock to examine your arm. Try to rest until then. Mila sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. Thank you, Maria smiled. You're safe here, Miss Carter. Mr. Moretti takes his promises very seriously. No one will hurt you again. After Maria left, Mila sat in the quiet luxury of the guest suite and tried to process the past hour. She'd left the hospital as Nurse Mila Carter, invisible and broken. Now she was someone important enough to warrant a mafia boss's protection, a guest in a mansion that probably cost more than the entire block where she'd grown up. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, still perfectly composed despite the late hour. He'd removed his suit jacket, and Mila could see the shoulder holster beneath his left arm, the dark metal of the gun a stark reminder of who he was. I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed, he said. This is too much. Mila gestured vaguely at the opulent room. I don't belong here. Lorenzo stepped inside, moving with that same predatory grace. You belong wherever you choose to be. Right now, you've chosen to be here. That's enough. What if I want to leave tomorrow, after the doctor visit? Then you leave. Lorenzo's expression was sincere. I meant what I said, Nurse Carter. This isn't a prison. You're free to go whenever you wish, though I'd prefer you stay until your arm heals properly. Mila studied his face, looking for deception and finding none. You really won't force me to stay? Force is for men who don't understand power. Lorenzo moved to the window, gazing out at his darkened gardens. True power is giving someone freedom and having them choose to remain anyway. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Mila didn't fully understand. She was too tired to unpack the implications, too overwhelmed to think beyond the immediate present. I should let you rest, Lorenzo said, turning back toward the door. If you need anything at all, wait. Mila stood, swaying slightly. What happened to Thomas? Is he... Thomas Carter is currently sitting in a private room at a hotel near O'Hare Airport, Lorenzo said calmly. His bags are packed. His flight to Phoenix leaves at 9 a.m. He was given $10,000 in cash and very clear instructions never to contact you again. He accepted these terms enthusiastically after I explained the alternative. You gave him money? Mila couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. I'm not cruel, Nurse Carter. Just thorough. Lorenzo's smile was thin and cold. He needed incentive to stay away. Money provides that incentive. Fear of what happens if he spends that money while remaining in Chicago provides insurance. Mila sank back onto the bed. I don't know what to say. Say goodnight. Say you'll try to sleep. Say anything except thank you, because you don't owe me gratitude for keeping a promise. Lorenzo paused in the doorway, his expression softening again in that subtle way that transformed his entire face. Your mother saved my life, Miss Carter. Protecting you is the least I can do to honor her memory. He left before Mila could respond, closing the door with a soft click that seemed to echo in the enormous room. Mila sat in the silence, her broken arm throbbing, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't organize. Somewhere in this mansion, Lorenzo Moretti, the most dangerous man in Chicago, was probably in his office or his bedroom, conducting business or sleeping or doing whatever crime lords did at 4 a.m. And Mila was safe. For the first time in 2 years, she was truly, completely safe. The tears came again, but this time they weren't from pain or fear. They were from relief so profound it felt like drowning, like breaking the surface after being underwater for so long she'd forgotten what air tasted like. Mila changed into the silk nightgown Maria had left, ridiculously expensive and softer than anything she'd ever worn, and climbed into bed. The mattress cradled her like a gentle hand, and the sheets smelled faintly of lavender. She thought she'd be too wired to sleep, too anxious about everything that had changed in the span of an hour. But exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, pulling her down into darkness that felt safe for the first time in years. Her last conscious thought was of green eyes, and a promise made 12 years ago, before her mother died, before Mila learned that safety was a luxury some people could never afford, until tonight, until Lorenzo Moretti had appeared in a hospital parking lot and changed everything. Mila woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, in a bed she'd never seen before, wearing silk pajamas that cost more than her monthly rent. For one blissful moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back with the force of a physical blow. Lorenzo Moretti, the SUV, Thomas exiled to Phoenix, the promise to a dead woman. Mila sat up carefully, cradling her broken arm. Someone had delivered her 2 battered suitcases while she slept, setting them neatly at the foot of the bed. The digital clock on the nightstand read 8:47 a.m. In 13 minutes, a doctor would arrive to examine her arm, a doctor who worked for a Mafia boss. Mila laughed, the sound slightly hysterical even to her own ears. This was her life now, at least temporarily. A soft knock preceded Maria's entrance. The older woman carried a breakfast tray loaded with fresh fruit, toast, and what smelled like heaven in a coffee pot. Good morning, Miss Carter. How did you sleep? Better than I have in years, Mila admitted, which feels strange to say, given the circumstances. Maria set the tray on the small table by the window and began arranging the dishes. Mr. Moretti has that effect on people. Those he protects sleep very well indeed. Those he hunts, She trailed off with a knowing smile. Well, they don't sleep at all. The casual mention of Lorenzo's darker activities should have frightened Mila. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. The man who had saved her from Thomas was the same man whose enemies disappeared. There was a brutal honesty in that, a clarity that Mila's normal world lacked. Eat, Maria encouraged. Dr. Ross will be here shortly. He's very good. He's been treating Mr. Moretti's household for 15 years. Mila picked at the fruit, her stomach too knotted with anxiety to appreciate the quality of the food. Where's Mr. Moretti? In his office. He has business calls this morning, but he asked to be notified once Dr. Ross finishes examining you. Maria's expression turned gentle. He's very concerned about your recovery. He doesn't even know me. He knew your mother. For Mr. Moretti, that's more than enough. Doctor. Ross arrived precisely at 9 o'clock. A silver-haired man with steady hands and kind eyes who examined Mila's arm with professional efficiency. He asked questions about the injury without asking who had caused it, clearly understanding that some answers were better left unspoken. It's a clean fracture, he announced after studying the x-rays he'd taken with a portable machine. You'll need a proper cast, which I'll apply now. 6 weeks of healing, then we'll reevaluate. You were lucky, Miss Carter. A few inches higher and you could have shattered your elbow. Lucky. Mila supposed that was one way to describe surviving Thomas's rage. The cast application was quick and professional. Dr. Ross chose a deep blue fiberglass that looked almost stylish against Mila's skin. He prescribed pain medication, gave instructions for care, and promised to check on her progress in 2 weeks. After he left, Mila sat in the beautiful bedroom and tried to figure out what to do with herself. She was used to 16-hour shifts, to constant motion and purpose. Sitting still felt alien, almost dangerous. Another knock. This time, Lorenzo stood in the doorway, changed into casual clothes, dark jeans and a gray sweater that somehow made him look even more imposing than the suit had. Dr. Ross says you'll heal well, he said. How do you feel? Confused? Displaced? Like I'm living in someone else's life. Mila met his eyes. But the pain is better. Thank you for arranging the doctor visit. Lorenzo moved into the room with that controlled grace, though he maintained a respectful distance. I've spoken with Chicago Memorial's administration. You're on medical leave for 6 weeks, with full pay. Your position will be waiting when you return. Mila's jaw dropped. How did you? The hospital's chief of staff is an old friend. He was happy to accommodate my request, especially when I mentioned your dedication to the pediatric oncology ward. Lorenzo's expression remained neutral. Your job is secure, Miss Carter. You don't need to worry about finances while you recover. You can't just fix everything with a phone call. I just did. The arrogance should have infuriated her. Instead, Mila felt an unexpected laugh bubble up. You're impossible. I'm effective. There's a difference. Lorenzo gestured toward the window. Would you like a tour of the grounds? The gardens are particularly beautiful this time of morning, and the fresh air might help clear your head. Mila stood, suddenly desperate to move, to do anything except sit in luxury while her brain tried to process the seismic shift her life had undergone. I'd like that. They walked through the mansion together, Lorenzo pointing out details with the easy knowledge of someone who'd lived here for years. The library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the formal dining room that could seat 20, the music room with a grand piano that gleamed like black ice. Do you play? Mila asked, gesturing to the piano. My mother insisted I learn. She said music civilized savage souls. Lorenzo's smile was brief and sad. I'm not sure it worked. Outside, the gardens were stunning, manicured lawns giving way to wilder areas with native plants and meandering stone paths. A fountain burbled in the center courtyard, and Mila could hear birds singing in the trees that bordered the property. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Elena would have loved it. Lorenzo stopped beside the fountain, his expression distant. Your mother. When she saved me, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment above a butcher shop, bleeding on cheap carpet and wondering if I'd live to see sunrise. I promised myself that if I survived, I'd build something better, something worthy of the second chance she gave me. Mila studied the mansion, the grounds, the evidence of wealth and power surrounding them. You've certainly done that. Material success is easy when you're willing to break certain rules. Lorenzo turned to face her fully. Building something meaningful, that's harder. I'm still trying to figure out if I've managed it. The vulnerability in his words surprised Mila. She'd expected a crime lord to be many things: ruthless, calculating, cold. She hadn't expected introspection or genuine uncertainty. Why organized crime? She asked. If you wanted to honor my mother's memory, why not choose something legal? Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. I was 17 when I came to Chicago from Sicily. No money, no family, no options. The Mafia took me in, trained me, gave me purpose. By the time I was old enough to understand I could choose differently, I was already too deep. The only way out was up, to a position where I could shape the organization rather than let it shape me. So you became the boss. I became the boss who enforces certain rules. No human trafficking, no drugs sold near schools, no targeting civilians who don't involve themselves in our business. I can't make the Mafia disappear, Miss Carter, but I can make it less monstrous than it would be under different leadership. Mila considered this. That's a very fine moral line you're walking. It's the only line I have. Lorenzo's green eyes met hers with uncomfortable honesty. I'm not a good man pretending to be bad. I'm a bad man trying to be less terrible than my nature suggests. Your mother saw potential in me. I've spent 12 years trying to prove she wasn't wrong. They walked in silence for a while, following a path that wound through flowering trees just beginning to bud. Mila's arm ached despite the pain medication, but the discomfort felt distant, manageable. Everything felt distant out here, as if the estate existed in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. What happens now? Mila finally asked. I can't just live here indefinitely, waiting for my arm to heal. You can do whatever you want. Read in the library, walk the grounds. Maria can arrange for anything you need: books, clothes, entertainment. Or you can rest and heal without pressure to do anything at all. Mila shook her head. I'm not good at doing nothing. Then don't. Lorenzo led her back toward the mansion. There's a home office on the second floor with computers and internet access. If you want to take online courses, research medical journals, or simply stay connected to the world, the resources are available. They entered through a side door that led directly into a sunny breakfast room. Maria had laid out lunch: fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and sliced meats arranged beautifully on fine china. I should probably eat alone, Mila said. You must have work to do. I always have work to do. It can wait. Lorenzo pulled out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his reputation. Unless you'd prefer privacy? Mila surprised herself by sitting down. No, company is nice. They ate together in comfortable silence, and Mila found herself relaxing incrementally. Lorenzo was surprisingly easy to be around when he wasn't radiating dangerous intensity. He asked about her work at the hospital, listened with genuine interest as she described the challenges of pediatric oncology nursing. It must be difficult, he said quietly, working with sick children. It's the hardest and most rewarding thing I've ever done. Mila's throat tightened, thinking about her young patients, brave, resilient kids fighting battles no child should face. They remind me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about facing fear and choosing hope anyway. Lorenzo's expression shifted, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. Your mother would be proud of who you've become. The words cracked something open in Mila's chest. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. I wish she'd told me about you, about saving your life. She was protecting you from my world. It was the right choice. Lorenzo's voice softened. Elena understood that some associations are dangerous. She kept you safe by keeping you separate. And now I'm here anyway. Now you're here because the alternative was worse. That's different than choosing this life willingly. Mila set down her fork, appetite gone. What if Thomas comes back? What if your promise and your money aren't enough? Then Thomas Carter will learn that some mistakes are permanent. Lorenzo's tone remained conversational, but steel ran through every word. I'm not a man who makes idle threats, Miss Carter. Your stepfather understands very clearly what will happen if he ever approaches you again. He's not that stupid. You can't watch over me forever. No, Lorenzo agreed, but I can watch over you until you're strong enough to watch over yourself. 6 weeks. Let yourself heal, figure out what you want, and then decide your next move from a position of strength rather than fear. It was the most reasonable thing anyone had said to Mila in years. She found herself nodding, accepting the logic even as part of her brain screamed that nothing about this situation was normal or safe. They finished lunch and Lorenzo excused himself to handle business matters. Mila wandered the mansion alone, exploring rooms filled with art and history, until she found herself in the library Lorenzo had mentioned earlier. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of books, classics, contemporary fiction, non-fiction across every subject imaginable. A rolling ladder provided access to the highest shelves, and comfortable reading chairs clustered near tall windows that overlooked the gardens. Mila selected a medical journal from the health section and settled into a chair, losing herself in articles about new treatments for childhood leukemia. It felt good to think about something familiar, something that made sense in a world that had suddenly become very strange. She read until the light began to fade, until Maria appeared to announce dinner would be served in 30 minutes. Mila returned to her bedroom to change, selecting a simple dress from her suitcase and feeling underdressed compared to the elegance surrounding her. Dinner was served in a smaller, more intimate dining room. Lorenzo was already seated, reading something on his phone with a frown that suggested bad news. He looked up when Mila entered, and the frown smoothed into neutral courtesy. "I hope you found ways to occupy yourself this afternoon. Your library is incredible." Mila took the seat across from him. "I could spend weeks in there and not finish reading everything that interests me. Consider it yours while you're here. Take any books to your room if you'd like." They ate roasted chicken with herbs and vegetables that tasted like something from a five-star restaurant. Conversation flowed more easily now, touching on neutral topics. Favorite books, Chicago's unpredictable weather, the challenges of maintaining gardens this large. Mila was almost relaxed when Lorenzo's phone buzzed with an urgent tone that made him tense immediately. He glanced at the screen, and whatever he saw there drained the warmth from his expression. "I apologize, but I need to handle something." He stood, suddenly all business. "Please, finish your meal. I'll check on you later." He was gone before Mila could respond, moving with predatory speed that reminded her exactly who he was. She finished eating alone, her brief sense of normalcy shattered by the reminder that this mansion, these gardens, this entire luxurious bubble existed because of violence and crime. Lorenzo Moretti was a criminal. A murderer, probably. A man who lived by rules that had nothing to do with law or justice. And Mila was living in his house, eating his food, accepting his protection. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as Mila returned to her beautiful bedroom and prepared for bed, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Safe. Seen. Important enough to warrant protection. Tomorrow she would probably second-guess every choice that had led her here. But tonight, as she climbed into bed that felt like sleeping on clouds, Mila let herself simply accept the gift of one more day free from fear. One more day where Thomas Carter couldn't hurt her. One more day in the strange sanctuary Lorenzo Moretti had built from a promise to a woman who'd saved his life 12 years ago. Outside, a storm was gathering. Mila could hear thunder rumbling in the distance, see lightning flickering beyond the windows. But here, in this room, in this mansion, in the protection of the most dangerous man in Chicago, she was safe. For now, that was enough. The storm broke just after midnight, rain lashing against the windows with enough force to wake Mila from dreams she couldn't quite remember. She lay in the darkness, listening to thunder roll across the estate, and tried to reconcile the past 24 hours with any version of reality she recognized. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Sarah Chen. "Where are you? Called the house. Thomas said you moved out. Are you safe?" Mila stared at the glowing screen, trying to formulate an answer that wouldn't sound insane. "I'm safe. Staying with a family friend while my arm heals. I'll explain everything soon." It was a lie wrapped around a truth wrapped around something so complicated Mila didn't have words for it yet. She set the phone down and closed her eyes, willing sleep to return. Instead, she heard something else beneath the storm's fury, raised voices coming from somewhere in the mansion. Lorenzo's voice, sharp with authority. Another man responding in rapid Italian, the words too quick and angry for Mila to catch individual meanings. A third voice joined, calmer but no less urgent. Mila knew she should stay in bed, should pull the covers over her head and pretend she heard nothing. Whatever crisis was unfolding downstairs had nothing to do with her. But she'd spent 3 years as an emergency room nurse. She recognized the particular tone of controlled chaos that meant something had gone terribly wrong. She grabbed a robe from the closet, silk, of course, because apparently Lorenzo's guest accommodations didn't include anything as pedestrian as cotton, and stepped into the hallway. The voices grew louder as she descended the grand staircase, following the sound to a room near the back of the mansion. The door stood ajar, light spilling into the dark corridor. Mila paused just outside, suddenly uncertain. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. She should turn around, go back to bed, maintain the careful separation between Lorenzo's protection and Lorenzo's business. Then she heard the unmistakable sound of someone in pain, a harsh, bitten-off groan that bypassed her brain and went straight to her training. Mila pushed the door open. The room was a study or office, all dark wood and leather furniture. Lorenzo stood beside a massive desk, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and blood, not his own, Mila registered with clinical detachment, splattered across the white fabric. Two of his men flanked the desk, their expressions grim. And slumped in the leather chair, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, was a man Mila didn't recognize. He was young, maybe 30, with dark hair matted with sweat and skin gone pale with blood loss. Every head turned toward Mila when she entered. Lorenzo's expression cycled through surprise, concern, and something that might have been resignation. "You should be sleeping," he said quietly. "You have a man bleeding in your office." Mila moved toward the injured man with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd triaged hundreds of patients. "How long ago was he shot?" "Miss Carter." "How long, Mr. Moretti?" Mila's voice carried the authority she used in the ER when doctors tried to override her assessment. "Because if it's been more than 30 minutes, he's going into shock. And if the bullet nicked his subclavian artery, he'll be dead in 20. Lorenzo studied her for a beat, then stepped aside. 40 minutes. Drive-by shooting in Little Italy. Marco took a bullet meant for me. Mila was already at Marco's side, her fingers finding his pulse. Fast and thready, definitely heading toward shock. She pulled back his blood-soaked shirt to examine the wound. Entry point high on the left shoulder, no visible exit wound. The bullet was still inside, and from the dark blood seeping steadily rather than spurting, it had missed the major arteries. Lucky. "I need clean towels, bottled water, and a first aid kit. Now." Mila looked at the two men who hadn't moved. "Unless you want to watch him die while you stand there looking tough." They glanced at Lorenzo, who nodded sharply. Both men disappeared, returning within minutes with supplies. Mila worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best she could while Marco gritted his teeth against the pain. "You need a hospital," she told him. "This needs surgical intervention. I can stabilize you, but I can't extract the bullet safely here." "No hospitals." Marco's voice was hoarse but firm. "Gunshot wounds mean police reports. Police reports mean questions we can't answer." "Then you need a doctor who doesn't ask questions." "I called Dr. Ross," Lorenzo said. "He's on his way." ETA 20 minutes. Mila packed the wound with gauze, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. 20 minutes is a long time when you're losing blood. He needs fluids, something for the pain, and he needs to stay conscious until the doctor arrives. She looked directly at Lorenzo. "Do you have medical supplies? IV equipment? Saline solution?" "There's a medical room upstairs, fully stocked." Lorenzo was already moving toward the door. "Show me what you need." The medical room turned out to be better equipped than some small-town emergency departments. Mila selected IV supplies, bags of saline, and pain medication while Lorenzo watched with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're not surprised by any of this, are you?" she asked as she gathered supplies. "The shooting, the secrecy, men bleeding in your office at midnight. This is my world, Miss Carter. Violence is part of the equation." Lorenzo's tone was matter-of-fact. "I'm surprised you're not running in the opposite direction." Mila met his eyes. "I'm a trauma nurse. I've seen gunshot wounds, stab wounds, and injuries that would make your stomach turn. The violence doesn't shock me. What shocks me is that you're willing to let a man die rather than take him to a hospital. Marco knows the risks of this life. He chose them." Lorenzo took some of the supplies from her arms. "But I'm grateful you're here to make sure those risks don't kill him tonight." They returned to the office where Marco was beginning to drift, his eyes unfocused. Mila worked quickly, starting an IV line with practiced efficiency and hanging the saline bag from a floor lamp that one of the men repositioned. She administered pain medication through the IV port, then checked Marco's vitals again. Pulse still too fast, but no longer thready. Blood pressure low, but stable. He'd make it until Dr. Ross arrived. Talk to him, Mila instructed Lorenzo. Keep him engaged, conscious. Tell him a story, ask him questions, anything to keep his mind active. Lorenzo pulled a chair close to Marco and began speaking in low, rapid Italian. Marco responded weakly, but his eyes focused on Lorenzo's face, tracking the conversation. Whatever Lorenzo was saying seemed to work. Marco even managed a faint smile at one point. Mila monitored the IV drip and checked the wound packing every few minutes. The bleeding had slowed significantly. Barring complications, Marco would survive. Dr. Ross arrived 18 minutes after Lorenzo's call, carrying a large medical bag and wearing the unflappable expression of a man who'd done this many times before. He took in the scene with a single glance, nodded to Mila with something like approval, and immediately began examining Marco. "Good work, Miss Carter," he said as he inspected her IV placement. "Very clean line, proper saline flow. You've bought him the time he needed." Together, they prepared Marco for bullet extraction. Dr. Ross worked with calm efficiency, using local anesthetic and surgical tools that gleamed under the office lighting. Mila assisted, anticipating his needs with the seamless coordination that came from years of emergency medicine. Lorenzo watched from across the room, his expression unreadable. His other men had positioned themselves by the door and windows, standing guard with the alert stillness of soldiers who knew danger could arrive at any moment. The bullet extraction took 40 minutes. Dr. Ross pulled a misshapen piece of metal from Marco's shoulder and dropped it into a steel tray with a soft clink. "Damaged but intact, no fragmentation. The shoulder will heal, though he'll need physical therapy." Dr. Ross began closing the wound with neat stitches. He was fortunate. A few centimeters to the right, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Marco, foggy with pain medication but conscious, managed a weak laugh. "Remind me to duck faster next time, Doc." "Remind yourself to choose a different profession," Dr. Ross replied dryly. "Though I suppose you're all a bit old to become accountants at this point." It took another 30 minutes to finish the procedure, administer antibiotics, and ensure Marco's vitals remained stable. Dr. Ross gave detailed care instructions, left additional medication, and departed with the same discretion he'd arrived with. Mila helped Lorenzo's men move Marco to a bedroom on the first floor, easier than navigating stairs, and got him settled with water, medication, and strict orders to rest for the next 48 hours. By the time she returned to the office, dawn was breaking. Gray light filtered through the windows, and Mila felt exhaustion crashing over her in waves. Her broken arm ached fiercely. She'd been moving too much, putting too much strain on the fracture. Lorenzo was cleaning blood from the leather chair, his movements methodical and practiced. He looked up when Mila entered. "You should be resting," he said. "Your arm will be fine. I've had worse shifts at the hospital." Mila sank into a chair that didn't have bloodstains. "Is this normal? Men getting shot? Midnight medical emergencies?" Lorenzo set down the cleaning cloth and faced her fully. "It's more common than I'd like, less common than it used to be. I've worked hard to establish territories and agreements that minimize violence, but there are always those who challenge the established order." "Who shot at you tonight?" "That's not your concern." "You're making me part of this world," Mila said quietly. "I just spent 3 hours keeping your man alive. I think that makes it my concern." Lorenzo was silent for a long moment, studying her with those unsettling green eyes. Finally, he sighed and sat in the chair beside her. "There's a new player in Chicago. Calls himself Viktor Kozlov, runs a Russian crew that's been pushing into territories that were previously neutral ground. He's young, aggressive, and doesn't respect the traditional boundaries that keep this city from descending into open warfare. And he wants you dead. He wants what I have. The territory, the influence, the control. Killing me is the fastest way to destabilize my organization and create opportunities for expansion." Lorenzo's expression remained calm, but Mila saw something darker beneath the surface. "Tonight was a warning, a demonstration that he can reach my people anywhere in the city." "What will you do?" "What I always do, respond proportionally. Make it clear that attacking my organization carries consequences that outweigh any potential gains." Lorenzo met her eyes. This is what I am, Miss Carter, what I've always been. The man who protects you is the same man who will order violence against those who threaten what's mine. If that changes your opinion of me, I understand. Mila considered this. She should be horrified. Should recognize this as her chance to leave, to walk away from a world where bullets flew and men bled in expensive offices at midnight. But she thought of Marco, who'd taken a bullet meant for Lorenzo, of the loyalty that inspired such sacrifice, of Lorenzo himself, who'd dropped everything to ensure his injured man received care, who'd kept Marco conscious and calm through sheer force of will and compassion. My mother saved your life, Mila said slowly. You could have forgotten about her, could have ignored the promise you made. Instead, you've watched over me for months, protected me from Thomas, given me a safe place to heal. That doesn't excuse... I'm not finished. Mila leaned forward, ignoring the pain in her arm. You're a criminal. You break laws, probably order terrible things, live by rules that have nothing to do with justice. But you also enforced boundaries that keep drugs away from schools. You exile abusive men instead of killing them. You employ people like Dr. Ross and Maria who could work anywhere but choose to work for you. Lorenzo's expression shifted, something like surprise flickering across his features. I'm not saying you're a good man, Mila continued. I'm saying you're more complicated than I expected. And the world you've shown me, the protection, the loyalty, the fierce commitment to those promises you make, that's not something I'm ready to walk away from yet. You're still in shock from everything that's happened, Lorenzo said quietly. In a few days, when reality settles, you'll feel differently. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. Mila stood, swaying with exhaustion. I'm going to sleep now. Check on Marco when I wake up. Try to process the fact that I just performed emergency medicine in a Mafia boss's office. She made it to the door before Lorenzo's voice stopped her. Thank you for saving Marco's life. Mila looked back at him, this dangerous, complicated man who'd turned her world upside down in the span of 48 hours. You're welcome. Try not to let anyone else get shot before I've had some sleep. His smile was brief and genuine. I'll do my best. Mila returned to her room as sunlight strengthened outside the windows. She should have been terrified by everything she'd witnessed. Instead, as she fell into bed still wearing the blood-flecked silk robe, she felt strangely energized. For 3 years she'd been invisible, a nurse who went through the motions, who worked herself to exhaustion to avoid thinking about her empty life and abusive home. She'd existed in the margins, never quite present, never fully engaged with the world around her, but tonight she'd been essential, needed. Her skills had mattered in a way that went beyond professional duty into something personal and immediate. Lorenzo Moretti had given her that. Not just safety or protection, but purpose. A reminder that she was capable of more than mere survival. The thought should probably worry her. It didn't. Mila slept deeply and dreamlessly, waking only when Maria knocked gently in the late afternoon. Mr. Moretti asked me to check on you, Maria said, setting down a tray with tea and light food. He's been concerned. You worked through the night helping Marco. Mila sat up, wincing as her arm protested the movement. How is Marco? Resting comfortably, complaining about being confined to bed, which Dr. Ross says is a good sign. Maria smiled. Mr. Moretti is with him now. He wanted me to tell you that dinner will be informal tonight, whenever you're ready. After Maria left, Mila showered carefully, keeping the cast dry, and changed into clean clothes. Her suitcases held mostly scrubs and casual wear, nothing appropriate for a Mafia mansion. She made a mental note to eventually retrieve more clothes from storage, assuming she stayed beyond the initial 6-week healing period. Assuming she wanted to stay at all. The thought surprised her. 3 days ago, the idea of living with Lorenzo Moretti would have been unthinkable. Now she was considering it as a genuine possibility. Mila found Lorenzo in Marco's room, sitting beside the bed and speaking in low Italian. Marco looked better, color returned to his face, eyes clear and alert. He brightened when Mila entered. The angel who saved my life, he said in accented English. Come, let me thank you properly. You can thank me by following Dr. Ross's instructions and not tearing those stitches. Mila checked his vitals with practiced efficiency. How's the pain? Manageable. The medication helps. Marco glanced at Lorenzo with obvious affection. The boss says you're Elena Russo's daughter. Your mother was a remarkable woman. You knew her? Only by reputation. She was legendary in certain circles. The nurse who saved Lorenzo's life and asked nothing in return except a promise. Marco's expression turned serious. We all know that promise is why you're here. Why the boss moved heaven and earth to get you out of a bad situation. Mila felt heat rise in her cheeks. I didn't realize my circumstances were common knowledge. Nothing stays secret long in this organization, Lorenzo said quietly. But everyone understands the debt I owe your mother. Protecting you honors that debt. No one questions it. After ensuring Marco had everything he needed, Mila and Lorenzo walked together toward the informal dining room Maria had mentioned. The mansion felt different in daylight, less imposing, more like a home that happened to be extraordinarily large and expensive. I have something for you, Lorenzo said, leading her to his office instead of the dining room. I wanted to give it to you privately. He retrieved a manila envelope from his desk and handed it to Mila. Inside, she found legal documents, lease agreements, utility transfers, and keys. What is this? Your apartment. 1-bedroom, north side, safe neighborhood near the hospital. The lease is paid for 1 year, utilities included. Fully furnished. Lorenzo's expression was carefully neutral. When your arm heals and you're ready to leave, you'll have somewhere safe to go, somewhere that's entirely yours. Mila stared at the documents, overwhelmed. This is too much. This is keeping my promise to your mother, making sure you have options, independence, a life that doesn't depend on anyone's charity or protection. Lorenzo moved to the window, giving her space to process. You can move in tomorrow if you want, or stay here for the full 6 weeks, or leave next month and use the apartment as you see fit. The choice is yours. Why are you doing this? Mila's voice came out smaller than she intended. The protection, I understand, but setting up an entire apartment? Arranging my medical leave? This goes beyond keeping a promise. Lorenzo turned to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, he looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way that seemed fundamentally at odds with his reputation. Your mother saw something in me worth saving, he said quietly. She looked at a bleeding criminal in an alley and decided his life had value. No one had ever done that before. My own family certainly never had. He paused, choosing his words carefully. When she made me promise to protect you, I thought it would be simple. Money? Maybe. A phone call if you ever needed help? I didn't expect to spend 12 years watching from a distance as you built a career, survived your mother's death, and endured abuse from a man who should have protected you instead of hurting you. You've been watching me for 12 years? Mila couldn't decide if that was comforting or terrifying. Not constantly, just periodic check-ins to ensure you were safe. The surveillance intensified 6 months ago when my contacts reported that Thomas's drinking was getting worse. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. I should have intervened sooner, before he broke your arm. That failure is mine to carry. You're not responsible for Thomas's actions. No, but I am responsible for keeping a promise to your mother. And I failed to prevent you from being hurt. Lorenzo crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away. So yes, Miss Carter, I'm doing more than necessary, because adequate isn't good enough when it comes to honoring the memory of the woman who saved my life. Mila looked down at the apartment keys in her hand, solid and real and representing a future she'd barely dared to imagine. Freedom, independence, a home that was truly hers. Thank you, she whispered, for all of it. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken things hanging between them. Then Lorenzo's phone buzzed with an urgent tone that shattered the intimacy of the moment. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened. I need to handle something. Will you excuse me? Of course. Lorenzo left quickly, already speaking in rapid Italian to whoever had messaged. Mila remained in the office, holding the keys to her new apartment and trying to understand the strange ache in her chest. She should be planning her departure. Should be counting down the days until her arm healed and she could reclaim her independent life. Instead, she found herself hoping the 6 weeks would pass slowly. Found herself wanting more evenings of conversation over dinner, more glimpses of the complicated man beneath Lorenzo's dangerous reputation. The realization should have frightened her. It didn't. Over the next 2 weeks, Mila settled into an unexpected routine. Mornings spent reading in the library or walking the gardens when weather permitted. Afternoons checking on Marco's recovery, and occasionally helping Dr. Ross with follow-up care. Evenings with Lorenzo when his business allowed, talking about everything and nothing over meals that Maria prepared with obvious love. They didn't discuss his criminal activities, didn't acknowledge the men who came and went at odd hours, or the tense phone calls Lorenzo took in Italian or Russian, or languages Mila didn't recognize. There was an unspoken agreement to keep those worlds separate. Lorenzo's protection of her existed in a bubble apart from his darker dealings. But the bubble couldn't last forever. It shattered on a Tuesday evening when Mila answered the library phone, an old landline that rarely rang, and heard a voice that sent ice through her veins. "Hello, Mila." Thomas Carter, calling from Phoenix or wherever Lorenzo had exiled him. "How did you get this number?" Mila's hand trembled as she gripped the receiver. "I still have friends in Chicago, people who owe me favors." Thomas's voice carried the edge of suppressed rage. "Did you really think you could just disappear? That sending me away would solve everything?" "Lorenzo warned you. Lorenzo Moretti doesn't scare me. He's just another thug with delusions of power." Thomas laughed, the sound ugly and familiar. "You made a mistake, Mila, aligning yourself with criminals. When this all falls apart, and it will, you'll have nowhere left to run." The line went dead. Mila stood frozen, the dial tone buzzing in her ear, as fear she'd thought conquered came rushing back. Thomas had found her, knew where she was. The safety Lorenzo had provided suddenly felt fragile, temporary, built on foundations that could crack at any moment. She found Lorenzo in his office, reviewing documents with two of his senior advisors. He took one look at her face and immediately dismissed the men. "What happened?" "Thomas called. The library phone. He knows I'm here." The words tumbled out in a rush. "He said you don't scare him, said everything will fall apart." Lorenzo's expression went cold and deadly. "Did he threaten you directly?" "Not exactly, but the implication was clear." Mila sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. "How did he find me?" "That's what I'm going to discover." Lorenzo was already on his phone, issuing orders in Italian. Within minutes, 3 men arrived, the same enforcers who'd been present the night Lorenzo had exiled Thomas. The conversation was rapid and intense, conducted mostly in Italian with occasional English words that Mila caught. "Phoenix. Trieste. Permanent solution." Finally, Lorenzo turned back to Mila. "Thomas left Phoenix 3 days ago. My people lost track of him in Las Vegas. He's been moving around using cash to avoid detection. He's coming here. Possibly, or he's simply trying to frighten you from a distance." Lorenzo's tone was reassuring, but his eyes remained hard. "Either way, security around the estate is being increased immediately, and I'm going to make one more attempt to reason with your stepfather. If that fails—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "I don't want you to kill him," Mila said quietly. "No matter what he's done, I don't want his blood on your hands because of me." Lorenzo knelt beside her chair, bringing them eye to eye. "Then I won't kill him, but I will ensure he never contacts you again. Do you trust me to handle this?" Mila looked into those green eyes and found herself nodding. "Yes, I trust you." The words felt monumental, world-shifting. 3 weeks ago, she would never have trusted a criminal, a killer, a man whose business was violence and control. But Lorenzo had shown her another side, the man who kept promises, who protected fiercely, who treated her with a respect Thomas had never managed. "I'll take care of this," Lorenzo promised. "You're safe here, Mila. No one will hurt you again." He used her first name for the first time, and the intimacy of it sent warmth spreading through her chest. Over the next 48 hours, the estate transformed into a fortress. Additional guards appeared at the gates and along the property perimeter. Security cameras were installed in places Mila hadn't noticed needed monitoring, and Lorenzo himself became more present, working from home instead of his downtown office, always within reach if Mila needed him. On Thursday evening, Lorenzo's phone rang with news that made his shoulders relax fractionally. "They found Thomas," he told Mila over dinner, "back in Phoenix. Apparently his calls were attempts to harass you, not preludes to actual contact. He's being reminded of the terms of our agreement with considerably more force this time." "What does that mean?" "It means Thomas Carter now understands that exile is a gift he shouldn't squander, and that any further contact with you will result in consequences he won't enjoy." Lorenzo's expression softened. "He won't bother you again, Mila. I guarantee it." The relief was so profound Mila felt tears threaten. "Thank you." You keep thanking me for things I should do automatically. Lorenzo reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. Protecting you isn't a favor, Mila. It's an obligation I'm honored to fulfill. Their eyes met and held, and something shifted in the air between them. Something Mila had been trying not to acknowledge for days now. The pull she felt toward this dangerous man, the way her heart rate increased when he entered a room, the disappointment when business called him away from their evening conversations. She was developing feelings for Lorenzo Moretti, complicated, inadvisable feelings that had no place in their arrangement. Lorenzo must have seen something in her expression because he drew his hand back, carefully reestablishing distance. Your arm should be healed enough to remove the cast in 3 weeks, he said, changing the subject with obvious deliberation. Dr. Ross will want to do x-rays to confirm the bone has set properly. And then I can go back to work. Mila tried to match his casual tone. Resume my normal life. If that's what you want. Isn't it what we agreed? 6 weeks of healing, then I returned to independence. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. Plans can change. If you wanted to stay longer, to use the estate as a home base while you transition back to work, the option is available. The offer hung between them, laden with implications neither seemed ready to address directly. I'll think about it, Mila said finally. But as she returned to her room that night, she knew the truth. She didn't want to leave. Didn't want to return to her solitary apartment and empty life, even if that apartment represented freedom and safety. She wanted to stay here, in this strange sanctuary, with the man who'd saved her from one kind of prison and offered her something she was only beginning to understand. The realization should have terrified her. It didn't. The morning Mila's feelings crystallized into something undeniable. Chicago was buried under an unseasonable April snowstorm. She woke to a world transformed, the estate's gardens draped in white, tree branches bowed under the weight of unexpected spring snow, and silence so complete it felt like the entire city was holding its breath. She found Lorenzo in the kitchen, of all places, making coffee with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Maria had the day off, and the mansion felt different without the usual staff presence, more intimate, almost domestic. I didn't know you could cook, Mila said from the doorway. Lorenzo looked up, and something in his expression made her breath catch. He'd foregone his usual suit for dark jeans and a simple black sweater, his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked younger this way, less like a crime lord and more like a man who might have chosen an entirely different life. I can make coffee and scrambled eggs. Beyond that, my culinary skills become dangerous. He gestured to the pot. Want some? They sat together at the kitchen island, a first since they usually took meals in the formal dining spaces, and watched snow fall past the windows. The intimacy of the moment felt deliberate, as if they'd both been circling this precipice for weeks and had finally decided to acknowledge it. I've been thinking about what you said, Mila began, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. About staying longer after my arm heals. Lorenzo's expression remained carefully neutral. And? I don't want to leave. The confession came out quieter than Mila intended. Not in 3 weeks. Maybe not ever. And that terrifies me because I barely understand what's happening between us. The silence that followed felt infinite. Lorenzo set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. What's happening between us, he said slowly, is something I've been trying very hard not to acknowledge. Because you're under my protection, living in my home, dependent on my resources. Any feelings that develop in this context are complicated at best, coercive at worst. You think I have Stockholm Syndrome? Mila couldn't keep the edge from her voice. That I'm confusing gratitude with something else? I think you've been through trauma. I think you're rebuilding your sense of safety and identity. And I think the last thing you need is me taking advantage of your vulnerability by pursuing feelings that might not survive once you're back in the real world. Mila stood abruptly, frustration overriding caution. You don't get to decide what I need, Lorenzo. You don't get to protect me from my own feelings by pretending yours don't exist. Mila, do you have feelings for me? She turned to face him, heart pounding. Real ones? Not just obligation to my mother's memory? Lorenzo stood as well, and the kitchen suddenly felt very small. What I feel is irrelevant. You deserve the chance to heal and figure out what you want without the pressure of my Answer the question. Mila moved closer, driven by something she didn't fully understand. Do you have feelings for me? The words hung between them, charged with possibility. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, and for a moment Mila thought he'd retreat behind the careful distance he'd maintained for weeks. Instead, something in his expression shifted, a wall coming down, revealing the man beneath the armor. Yes. His voice was rough, almost angry. I have feelings for you that go far beyond honoring a promise to your mother. I've had them since the night you walked out of that emergency room with a broken arm and more courage than most men I know. But that doesn't make acting on them right or fair to you. Mila's breath caught. Why not? Because you don't know what you're choosing. You've seen the surface of my world, the mansion, the protection, the occasional glimpse of violence. But you haven't seen what it really means to be involved with someone like me, the constant danger, the moral compromises, the fact that people I care about become targets. Like Marco. Marco signed up for this life. You didn't. Lorenzo ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. If you stay, if we explore whatever this is between us, you become part of my world in ways that can't be undone. Your safety becomes a vulnerability my enemies will exploit. Your choices become limited by the realities of who I am and what I do. You're trying to scare me away. I'm trying to be honest with you. Lorenzo's green eyes burned with intensity. I want you to stay, Mila. I want to see where these feelings lead, but I want you to make that choice with full knowledge of what you're accepting. The doorbell rang, shattering the moment. Lorenzo tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward where his weapon would be if he were wearing his suit jacket. The gesture reminded Mila of exactly what they'd been discussing, the ever-present danger that defined his existence. Stay here, Lorenzo ordered, already moving toward the entrance hall. But Mila followed, watching from a distance as Lorenzo checked the security monitor before opening the door. The man on the other side was in his 50s, expensively dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Antonio. Lorenzo's tone was carefully neutral. This is unexpected. I need to speak with you, privately. The man's gaze slid past Lorenzo to where Mila stood, his expression hardening. Unless you're too busy entertaining guests to discuss business. My personal life is none of your concern. It becomes my concern when it affects organizational security. Antonio stepped inside without invitation, snow dusting his shoulders. We need to talk about Viktor Kozlov and about the new complications your current situation has created. Lorenzo's expression went cold. Mila, would you excuse us? She wanted to protest, to demand inclusion in conversations that clearly concerned her. But the look Lorenzo gave her was both apology and command, so she retreated to the library and tried not to listen to the raised voices that soon echoed from the study. The argument lasted 30 minutes. When Antonio finally left, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the windows, Mila emerged to find Lorenzo standing in the entrance hall, his expression darker than she'd ever seen it. What happened? Antonio believes you're a liability, a distraction that makes me vulnerable to attack. Lorenzo's voice was flat, emotionless. He's not entirely wrong. Mila felt cold settle in her stomach. What does that mean? It means the organization is questioning my judgment, wondering why I'm devoting resources to protecting someone outside our world, suggesting that my feelings for you are clouding my strategic thinking. Lorenzo met her eyes, and the pain there was almost unbearable. They're worried Viktor Kozlov will use you against me. So what do they want you to do? Send me away? They want me to make a choice, the organization or you. The words hit Mila like a physical blow. She'd known, theoretically, that Lorenzo's world operated by different rules. But hearing it stated so baldly that she represented a problem to be solved, a weakness to be eliminated, made it terrifyingly real. And what do you want? She asked quietly. Lorenzo crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, and suddenly his hands were framing her face, his intensity focused entirely on her. I want to tell Antonio and everyone else to go to hell. I want to keep you here, safe, and deal with the consequences as they come. But that's selfish. That's putting my desires ahead of your safety. Maybe I'm willing to take the risk. You don't understand what you're risking. Lorenzo's thumbs brushed her cheekbones, the gesture achingly tender. Viktor Kozlov is escalating. 2 more of my men were attacked last week. He's targeting my businesses, my operations, anyone associated with my organization. If he discovers you matter to me, and he will, because Antonio's not the only one questioning my recent behavior, you become the most valuable target he has. Then protect me the way you protect everyone else in your organization. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Mila covered his hands with her own, holding them against her face. You're making this complicated because you think you're corrupting me or putting me in danger I don't understand. But I'm not naive, Lorenzo. I know what you are. I know the life you lead, and I'm choosing to stay anyway. Why? The question was raw, almost desperate. Why would you choose this? You could have the apartment I arranged, a clean break, a normal life away from all of this violence and moral ambiguity. Because normal wasn't working for me. Mila's voice strengthened. I spent 3 years invisible, going through motions, surviving instead of living. You changed that, not just by saving me from Thomas, but by seeing me, by treating me like I mattered, by showing me a version of myself that was strong enough to stitch up gunshot wounds and stand up to crime lords. Lorenzo's expression shifted, something like wonder breaking through the darkness. You're remarkable. Do you know that? I'm a pediatric oncology nurse with a recently healed broken arm who's developing inconvenient feelings for a mafia boss. I'm a disaster. You're the most extraordinary disaster I've ever encountered. The kiss happened without conscious decision, as inevitable as gravity. Lorenzo's lips met hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him, his hands still cradling her face like she was something precious and fragile. Mila rose on her toes, deepening the kiss, and felt Lorenzo's control fracture. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss turned fierce and hungry. Mila's good hand fisted in his sweater, holding on as weeks of tension and unspoken desire finally found release. She'd been kissed before, but never like this, never with the feeling that the person holding her saw every part of who she was and wanted her anyway. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea, he murmured. Probably. You should leave. Go to the apartment, resume your life, forget about me. I don't want to. Mila, I'm not leaving, Lorenzo, not unless you directly order me to go, and maybe not even then. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Choosing to stay and face whatever comes next. You don't get to make that decision for me. The vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her heart. I don't know how to do this, how to be with someone I care about without putting them in danger. Then we'll figure it out together. Lorenzo studied her face as if memorizing every detail. If you stay, if we do this, there are rules. Security protocols you'll have to follow, places you can't go alone, people you'll need to avoid. Your freedom will be limited in ways you can't imagine yet. I understand. You really don't, but you will. He kissed her again, softer this time. And I'm selfish enough to let you find out instead of doing the right thing and pushing you away. The next 3 days passed in a strange bubble of domesticity and danger. Lorenzo worked from home, conducting business from his study while Mila read in the library or walked the snow-covered gardens. They took meals together, conversation flowing easily now that the tension between them had been acknowledged. And every evening, after the business calls ended and the security reports were filed, they found their way to each other. Kisses in the library, quiet conversations on the couch, the slow exploration of new territory. But the outside world couldn't be ignored forever. On Thursday afternoon, Mila was reading medical journals when Maria appeared in the library doorway, her usually composed expression tight with worry. Miss Carter, Mr. Moretti needs you in his office immediately. The urgency in Maria's tone sent alarm racing through Mila's veins. She followed Maria through the mansion to Lorenzo's study, where she found him standing at the window, tension radiating from every line of his body. What's wrong? Lorenzo turned, and the look on his face made Mila's stomach drop. Viktor Kozlov just issued a public challenge. He's claiming I've gone soft, that I'm distracted by personal entanglements. He's demanding I meet him tomorrow night to settle our territorial disputes. That's a trap. obviously. Lorenzo's smile was cold. He wants to draw me out, eliminate me in front of witnesses, and destabilize my organization in one move. It's actually quite elegant as far as power plays go. So you're not going. I have to go. If I refuse, I look weak. Every fence-sitter in the organization will see it as confirmation that Kozlov's right, that I've lost my edge. Lorenzo moved to his desk, pulling up security footage on his computer. The meeting is set for neutral ground, a warehouse in the industrial district. I'll bring my best people, negotiate from a position of strength, and make it clear that challenging me carries consequences. Mila's nursing training kicked in, the part of her brain that assessed risks and prepared for worst-case scenarios. You're going to get shot again. Possibly. But if I handle this right, Kozlov will back down. He's aggressive, but not suicidal. A show of force combined with strategic concessions might be enough to restore balance. And if it's not? Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. Then tomorrow night could get very complicated very quickly. Fear clawed at Mila's throat. She'd known, intellectually, that Lorenzo's life was dangerous, but knowing it and watching him prepare to walk into a situation that could end with his death were entirely different things. Don't go. The words burst out before she could stop them. Let someone else handle it. Send Antonio or one of your other advisors. I can't. Lorenzo's voice was gentle but implacable. Leadership means being willing to face danger personally. If I send someone else to this meeting, I might as well resign and hand the organization to Kozlov on a silver platter. Then take me with you. Absolutely not. Lorenzo, no, Mila. His tone left no room for argument. You stay here, behind security, where Kozlov can't use you against me. That's non-negotiable. They stared at each other, the tension between them electric. Finally, Mila nodded, recognizing when pushing would be counterproductive. Fine, but you come back alive, or I'm going to be very angry with you. The smile that crossed Lorenzo's face was genuine, transforming his features. I'll do my best. That night, they sat together in Lorenzo's private quarters, a space Mila hadn't entered before, decorated with the same expensive simplicity as the rest of the mansion, but somehow more personal. Photos lined one shelf, most showing a younger Lorenzo with an elegant woman who had to be his mother. Books in Italian filled another shelf, well-worn spines suggesting frequent reading. Tell me about your mother, Mila said, curled beside Lorenzo on the leather couch. He was quiet for a long time, his fingers absently stroking her hair. She was everything my father wasn't, kind, educated, devoted to the idea that people could be better than their circumstances. She hated what my father did for a living but loved him too much to leave. How did she die? Cancer. Ovarian, stage 4 by the time they caught it. Lorenzo's voice went flat. We had the best doctors, the most expensive treatments. None of it mattered. She died 6 months after diagnosis, and my father followed her a year later. Heart attack, officially. But I think he died of a broken heart. Mila threaded her fingers through his, offering silent comfort. She would have liked you, Lorenzo continued, would have appreciated that you see people as they are, not as they pretend to be. She always said the measure of a person wasn't what they did in public, but who they were when no one was watching. And who are you when no one's watching? Lorenzo turned to look at her, his expression unguarded. Tired. Lonely. Hoping that the choices I make add up to something meaningful instead of just perpetuating cycles of violence and control. The vulnerability in his words made Mila's chest ache. She kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't articulate into the gesture, reassurance, affection, the terrifying realization that what she felt for him had grown far beyond simple attraction. They made love that night with a tenderness that surprised them both. The careful urgency of people who understood tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. Afterward, lying in Lorenzo's arms in the pre-dawn darkness, Mila felt the full weight of her choice settle over her. She'd fallen in love with a man who lived with death as a constant companion, who made decisions that cost lives and shaped the criminal landscape of an entire city, who could kiss her with heartbreaking gentleness one moment and order violence the next without apparent contradiction. And she didn't regret it. The morning of the meeting, Lorenzo was different, harder, more focused. The veneer of civilization he wore around Mila stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. He dressed in a dark suit with body armor underneath, checked his weapons with practiced efficiency, and issued final instructions to his security team with the cold authority of a general preparing for battle. Mila watched from the doorway of his bedroom, trying to memorize every detail. The way his hands moved as he holstered his gun, the set of his shoulders, the grim determination in his eyes. "If something happens to me," Lorenzo said without looking up, "Marco has instructions to get you out of Chicago. New identity, new city, enough money to start over completely. You'll be safe." "Nothing's going to happen. But if it does, Lorenzo." Mila crossed to him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You're coming back. We're going to have dinner tonight, probably argue about whether I'm staying long term, and you're going to tell me I'm impossible while looking at me like I'm the best thing that's ever happened to you." His smile was brief but genuine. "You are impossible. And you love it." "I do." He cupped her face, the gesture already familiar. "I love you. I should probably wait to say that until after I've survived this meeting, but just in case," Mila kissed him to stop the words, refusing to let him finish that thought. "Tell me tonight, when you come home." Lorenzo left an hour later, surrounded by 6 of his best men, driving toward a meeting that could reshape Chicago's criminal landscape or end with his death. Mila stood at the window of his study, watching the convoy of black SUVs disappear down the long driveway, and tried to ignore the fear clawing at her throat. Marco appeared beside her, his shoulders still bandaged, but his stance steady. "He'll be fine. The boss always comes back." "How can you be sure?" "Because he has something worth coming back to now. That makes all the difference." The hours that followed were the longest of Mila's life. She tried to read, to watch television, to do anything that would distract her from imagining every terrible scenario. Maria brought tea and sympathy. Marco updated her periodically on communications from the security team. Lorenzo had arrived at the warehouse. The meeting was underway, no shots fired yet. That "yet" hung in the air like a guillotine blade. At 7:30, Mila's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your boyfriend is currently surrounded by my men. If you want him to leave that warehouse alive, you'll come alone to the address I'm sending. You have 30 minutes. A second text followed with coordinates in the industrial district. Mila's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. This was the scenario Lorenzo had warned her about. Viktor Kozlov using her as leverage, forcing impossible choices. She should tell Marco, should let Lorenzo's people handle it, should follow every security protocol Lorenzo had established. Instead, she grabbed her jacket and slipped out through the servants' entrance while Marco was checking in with the security team. The Uber driver who picked her up gave her nervous looks as they drove toward the industrial district, probably wondering why a woman with a cast on her arm was heading into one of Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods at night. Mila didn't care. All that mattered was getting to Lorenzo before Kozlov made good on his threat. The address led to a warehouse a block away from where Lorenzo's meeting was taking place. Mila paid the driver and approached the building, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. The door was unlocked. Inside, the warehouse was mostly empty, except for a few crates and a single chair positioned in the center of the space. A man stood beside the chair, young, maybe 30, with sharp Slavic features and eyes that reminded Mila of a shark. Viktor Kozlov. "Miss Carter, how punctual." His accent was thick, but his English was perfect. "Please, sit." "Where's Lorenzo?" "Still at our meeting, I imagine. Trying to negotiate terms that will never satisfy me." Kozlov circled her like a predator. "I didn't actually need you to come here. The text was simply a test to see if you would." Cold realization washed over Mila. "You wanted to prove I'm his weakness. I wanted to prove that the great Lorenzo Moretti has become soft and sentimental, that he's allowed personal attachments to compromise his judgment." Kozlov smiled, the expression holding no warmth. "And you've just confirmed it beautifully by walking into an obvious trap." Mila's mind raced, trying to find an escape route, a way to undo her catastrophic mistake. "What do you want?" "Originally, Lorenzo's territory and his life, but now I realize there's a better option." Kozlov pulled out his phone and took a photo of Mila. "I'm going to send this to Lorenzo. Show him that I have you, and then I'm going to make him choose his organization or your life." "He'll choose the organization." Mila forced conviction into her voice. "I'm not worth destroying everything he's built." "Let's find out, shall we?" Kozlov sent the photo, and Mila watched her world narrow to the wait for Lorenzo's response. Seconds stretched into minutes. Her phone buzzed. Lorenzo calling. Kozlov answered on speaker. "Victor?" Lorenzo's voice was deadly calm. "Let her go." "Why would I do that? She came here of her own free will. Made quite the grand gesture, really." Kozlov's smile widened. "I'm impressed, Moretti. You've inspired remarkable loyalty. Name your prize, territory, money, whatever you want. Just let Mila walk out of there unharmed." "See, that's the problem. I don't want your money or your territory anymore. I want your complete capitulation. You resign, publicly acknowledge my authority, and dissolve your organization. Then I let Miss Carter live." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Mila could picture Lorenzo's face, could imagine the calculations running through his mind. "Don't do it," she said clearly. "Lorenzo, don't give him what he wants. I made this choice. I own the consequences." "Mila, I mean it. Don't destroy everything for me." "How touching." Kozlov ended the call and pocketed his phone. Now we wait to see what Moretti values more, power or love. They didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, the warehouse door burst open and Lorenzo strode in, flanked by Marco and 4 other men, all armed and radiating lethal intent. But it was Lorenzo himself who made Mila's breath catch. She'd seen him dangerous before, had glimpsed the predator beneath the civilized surface, but this was different. This was a man who'd stripped away every pretense and revealed exactly why people feared his name. "Let her go, Victor." Lorenzo's voice was soft, almost conversational. "This is your only warning." "Or what? You'll start a war in the middle of Chicago?" Kozlov grabbed Mila, pulling her against him with a knife suddenly at her throat. One move and she dies. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, calculation giving way to cold fury. "You've made a critical miscalculation." "Have I?" "You assumed I'd choose between Mila and my organization. That I'd sacrifice one to save the other." Lorenzo took a single step forward. "But you're forgetting. I don't make choices like that. I eliminate threats completely." The warehouse erupted into chaos. Lorenzo's men moved with practiced precision, and suddenly Kozlov's backup, men Mila hadn't even noticed in the shadows, were being disarmed and subdued. Kozlov's knife pressed harder against Mila's throat, and she felt a sting as it broke skin. Then Lorenzo was there, moving faster than Mila thought possible, his hand catching Kozlov's wrist with brutal force. The knife clattered to the ground, and Kozlov staggered backward. "You don't touch her," Lorenzo said, each word precise and terrible. "You don't threaten her. You don't even think about her without my permission." He hit Kozlov once, a devastating blow that sent the younger man crashing to the concrete. Lorenzo stood over him, and Mila saw the exact moment he decided not to kill. "You're going to leave Chicago tonight," Lorenzo continued in that same terrifyingly calm voice. "You're going to take whatever's left of your operation and relocate to a city of my choosing. And you're going to spend the rest of your life remembering that you had one chance to walk away, and you wasted it on a woman you should never have touched." Kozlov, bleeding from his mouth, managed a nod. Lorenzo turned to Mila, and the fury in his expression transformed into something else. Relief, fear, anger, all mixed together. He crossed to her, his hands gentle as they examined the small cut on her throat. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Lorenzo, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. We'll discuss your spectacularly bad decision-making later." But his hands were shaking as they cupped her face. "Right now, I just need to know you're okay." "I'm okay." Mila covered his hands with her own. "I'm okay because you came for me. I'll always come for you. That's the problem." Lorenzo pulled her close, his arms coming around her with desperate intensity. "You're my weakness, Mila, the thing that makes me vulnerable. And every enemy I have will exploit that. Then we deal with it together." Lorenzo pressed his face against her hair, and Mila felt him shaking. "I thought I'd lost you. When I saw that photo, I'm here. I'm safe." They stood together in the middle of the warehouse while Lorenzo's men finished securing Kozlov and his people, and Mila understood with perfect clarity what her choice meant. This would be her life now. Danger and violence balanced against moments of fierce connection. Security, bought through Lorenzo's reputation and power, freedom defined by the boundaries of his protection. and she was choosing it anyway, choosing him. Marco approached quietly. "Boss, we should move. Police will be here soon." Lorenzo nodded, but he didn't release Mila. "Get Kozlov out of Chicago. Make sure he understands the terms of his exile are permanent. Consider it done." The drive back to the estate was silent, except for Lorenzo's hands never quite leaving contact with Mila. Fingers threaded through hers, palm resting on her knee, constant reassurance that she was there and alive and his. Only when they were back in his private quarters, the door locked and security posted outside, did Lorenzo's iron control finally crack. "Don't ever do that again." His voice was rough with emotion. "Don't ever walk into danger like that for me. You would have done the same. That's different. I know how to handle these situations. And I know that I couldn't sit safely at home while the man I love walked into a trap." Mila turned to face him fully. "I made a choice, Lorenzo. Maybe it was reckless. Maybe it was stupid. But it was mine to make." "The man you love?" Lorenzo's expression shifted, vulnerability breaking through the anger. "Yes, I love you." Mila said it clearly, without hesitation. "I love you even though you're dangerous and complicated and live in a world I barely understand. I love you because you see me, because you keep your promises, because you're trying to be better than the life you were born into." Lorenzo kissed her then, and Mila tasted desperation and relief, and something that felt like hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said quietly, "and that terrifies me more than any enemy ever could." "We'll figure it out. Will we?" "We have to." Mila pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "Because I'm not leaving. Not now. Not ever. You're stuck with me, Lorenzo Moretti." His smile was small but genuine. "That might be the best news I've had in years." They stayed awake through the night, talking and planning and slowly coming to terms with what their relationship meant for both their futures. Lorenzo explained the realities of his world in brutal detail, the constant security, the limited freedom, the fact that Mila would always be a target as long as she remained by his side. And Mila listened, absorbing every harsh truth, and chose him anyway. By the time dawn broke over the estate, they'd reached an understanding. Mila would return to work at the hospital, but with security measures in place. She'd move into the apartment Lorenzo had arranged, but he'd stay there often enough that it became their space rather than just hers. And they'd navigate the complications of their relationship one day at a time, building something real from the unlikely foundation of a promise made 12 years ago. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't safe, but it was theirs, forged in danger and sealed with choices neither of them could unmake. And as Mila fell asleep in Lorenzo's arms, the morning light streaming through windows that overlooked gardens she'd come to love, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Complete. Whole. Home. Not despite the danger and moral complexity, but because of it. Because Lorenzo had given her a choice, and she'd chosen him, chosen this life. Chosen to love a man whose world operated by rules that had nothing to do with safety or convention. The consequences would be complicated. The future was uncertain. But for now, wrapped in the arms of Chicago's most dangerous man, Mila had never felt safer in her life. The reality of Mila's choice arrived with her first day back at Chicago Memorial Hospital. She stood in the locker room at 2:30 in the afternoon, pulling on scrubs that felt both familiar and strange after 6 weeks away, and tried to ignore the fact that 2 of Lorenzo's men were stationed in the parking garage and another was positioned in the hospital cafeteria. Sarah Chen found her before her shift officially started, pulling her into a fierce hug that made Mila's recently healed arm protest. 6 weeks, Sarah said, stepping back to examine Mila's face. 6 weeks of radio silence, except for occasional texts saying you were recovering with a family friend. Want to tell me what really happened? Mila had prepared for this conversation, had rehearsed the careful balance of truth and omission that her new life required. Thomas broke my arm. Someone who knew my mother helped me get away from him and gave me a safe place to heal. That's all you need to know. That's not all I need to know. Sarah's expression turned serious. You look different, calmer maybe, but also like you're carrying something heavy you can't talk about. I am. Mila met her friend's eyes. And I need you to trust that I'm okay, that I made choices that were right for me, even if they don't make sense from the outside. Sarah studied her for a long moment. Does this have anything to do with the very expensive car that's been parked across from your new apartment building? The one with the driver who never seems to leave? So Sarah had already figured out more than Mila wanted her to know. It's complicated. Complicated like witness protection? Or complicated like you're involved with someone dangerous? The second one. There was no point lying when Sarah had always been able to read her like a book. Please don't ask me for details I can't give you. Sarah's expression cycled through concern, frustration, and finally resignation. Just promise me you know what you're doing, that you're choosing this with your eyes open. I promise. The shift was both familiar and surreal. Mila fell back into the rhythm of pediatric oncology nursing, checking vitals, administering medications, comforting frightened children and their exhausted parents. But now she carried a phone that buzzed every hour with security check-ins from Marco or one of Lorenzo's other men. Now she was hyper-aware of everyone who entered the ward, evaluating potential threats with instincts she'd developed over 6 weeks of living in Lorenzo's world. During her dinner break, she found a quiet corner of the cafeteria and called Lorenzo. He answered on the first ring, and just hearing his voice made some of the tension leave her shoulders. How's your first day back? Strange. Good. Exhausting. Mila watched families move through the cafeteria, ordinary people living ordinary lives, and felt the vast distance between her old existence and her new reality. I forgot how much I missed this. The work, the purpose, making a difference for kids who need it. I'm glad. Lorenzo's tone was warm, but she could hear the strain beneath it. Marco says everything is secure, no unusual activity around the hospital. You're worried. I'm always worried now. It comes with loving someone who has a remarkable talent for walking into danger. But there was affection in the words, not accusation. What time does your shift end? 11. Are you? I'll be at your apartment when you arrive, unless you'd prefer to come back to the estate. Mila thought about the mansion with its gardens and luxury, the place that had become a sanctuary during her recovery. Then she thought about the apartment Lorenzo had arranged, her own space, her declaration of independence even as she chose to share her life with him. The apartment. I need to start living there, making it feel like home. Then I'll see you tonight. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of patient care and documentation. Mila was reviewing charts when Dr. Patterson, the head of pediatric oncology, appeared at the nurses' station. Mila, welcome back. We've missed your steady hands around here. Dr. Patterson was in her 50s, brilliant and demanding, with little patience for incompetence. I wanted to discuss something with you. My office, when you have a moment. They walked together through the quiet evening corridors to Dr. Patterson's office, and Mila felt nerves flutter in her stomach. Whatever this was, it felt significant. I'll get straight to the point, Dr. Patterson said once they were seated. I'm retiring in 6 months. The hospital board is looking for someone to take over as department head for pediatric oncology. Your name came up. Mila's mind went blank with shock. I'm just a nurse. Department heads are usually doctors, yes. But the board is interested in a different model, administrative oversight handled by someone with frontline experience and proven leadership skills. You'd work closely with the medical staff, but focus on patient care protocols, staffing, family support programs. Doctor. Patterson leaned forward. You're one of the best nurses I've worked with, Mila. You have instincts that can't be taught, and compassion that never burns out, despite how devastating this specialty can be. I think you'd be perfect for this role. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. The position would come with a significant salary increase, better hours, and the opportunity to shape how we care for some of the most vulnerable patients in this hospital. Dr. Patterson smiled. You've been through something difficult recently. I don't know the details and I don't need to, but you came back. That tells me you're committed to this work. I'd like to see that commitment rewarded. Mila left the office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet again. Department head. Leadership. A career path she'd never imagined for herself suddenly opening up like a door she hadn't known existed. She was still processing the conversation when her shift ended, and she walked to the parking garage, automatically scanning for threats before she remembered that Lorenzo's security was doing that for her. The black SUV was waiting in its usual spot, and Marco gave her a quick nod as she approached. Everything quiet? She asked. Boring as hell, which is exactly how we like it. Marco opened the rear door for her. The boss is already at your apartment. Brought dinner from that Italian place you mentioned liking. The drive to her new apartment, her own apartment, still strange to think about, took 20 minutes through evening traffic. The building was in a good neighborhood, close to the lake, with actual security that didn't raise eyebrows when Lorenzo's people conducted their additional surveillance. Mila found Lorenzo in the kitchen, unpacking containers of pasta and bread that made her stomach growl. He'd changed out of his suit into dark jeans and a black sweater, and the domesticity of the scene made her heart squeeze. "How was work?" he asked, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like coming home. "Good. Exhausting. And apparently I'm being considered for department head." Lorenzo's eyebrows rose. "That's significant." "It's terrifying." Mila helped him set out plates and silverware. "I'd be responsible for staffing, protocols, budgets, making decisions that affect dozens of families. I'm not sure I'm qualified." "You saved Marco's life with nothing but nursing training and instinct. You walked into a warehouse to face down a Russian mobster. You're more qualified than you think." They ate together at the small dining table, and Mila realized this was what she wanted, this balance between her work and Lorenzo's world, between independence and partnership, between the person she'd been and the person she was becoming. "I'm going to accept the position," she said suddenly. "If they offer it formally, I'm going to say yes." Lorenzo smiled, genuine pride in his expression. "Good. You deserve recognition for what you do. It'll mean longer hours sometimes, more responsibility, less flexibility if you need me to." "Mila." Lorenzo reached across the table to take her hand. "Your career doesn't revolve around my needs. You pursue this because it matters to you, because you're brilliant at what you do. I'll adapt." The words settled something in Mila's chest that she hadn't realized needed settling. She'd been so focused on fitting into Lorenzo's world that she'd forgotten she was allowed to have her own ambitions, her own path forward. They spent the evening like a normal couple, talking about their days, watching a movie, existing in the comfortable intimacy of two people learning how to build a life together. It wasn't until nearly midnight, when they were getting ready for bed, that Lorenzo's phone rang with the particular tone he'd designated for emergencies. His expression went cold and professional as he answered. "Talk to me." Mila couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Lorenzo's face cycle through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been satisfaction. "Understood. I'll handle it." He ended the call and turned to Mila. "I need to go out for a few hours. Security issue that requires my attention." "What kind of security issue?" Lorenzo hesitated, and Mila recognized the moment he was deciding how much to tell her. Finally, he sighed. "One of Kozlov's men is still in Chicago. Been causing problems, trying to rebuild what's left of Victor's operation. Tonight he made the mistake of approaching one of my legitimate businesses. I need to remind him that exile means everyone associated with Kozlov's organization. You're going to hurt him." "I'm going to make an example of him." Lorenzo's tone was matter of fact. "It's necessary to maintain order, to show that challenging my authority has consequences." Mila knew she should feel something, horror maybe, or moral outrage. Instead, she just felt tired acceptance. This was who Lorenzo was. This was the life she'd chosen. "Be careful," she said. Lorenzo kissed her forehead. "Always. Get some sleep. I'll be back before you wake up." But Mila couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new apartment and thinking about the strange duality of her existence. By day, she was Mila Carter, pediatric oncology nurse under consideration for department head. By night, she was the woman waiting for a Mafia boss to return from whatever violence was necessary to protect his territory. The two worlds shouldn't coexist, and yet somehow they did. Lorenzo returned just before dawn, moving quietly through the apartment. Mila heard the shower run, and when he finally slid into bed beside her, he smelled of expensive soap and nothing else. No blood, no gunpowder. He'd cleaned away whatever he'd done in the night. "Everything handled?" she asked softly. "Everything handled." Lorenzo pulled her close. "Kozlov's man is on a plane to Moscow. He won't be coming back." Mila didn't ask what threats or violence had been required to achieve that outcome. She was learning that some questions were better left unasked, some details better left unknown. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Mila worked her shifts at the hospital, poured herself into patient care, and gradually built relationships with families who needed her expertise and compassion. Dr. Patterson formally offered her the department head position, and Mila accepted with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Meanwhile, Lorenzo conducted his business with the efficiency that had made him Chicago's most powerful crime lord. He spent nights at Mila's apartment when his schedule allowed, and they developed rituals: Sunday morning breakfast together, evening walks along the lake when security permitted, quiet moments of domesticity stolen between the demands of their respective worlds. But the violence was always there, lurking at the edges. A rival organization testing boundaries, a shipment hijacked, a territory dispute that required Lorenzo's personal intervention. Mila learned to recognize when he'd had a difficult day by the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes went distant and cold. She learned not to ask for details, learned to provide comfort without requiring confession, learned to love a man whose hands were stained with deeds she preferred not to imagine in specifics. 3 months after returning to work, Mila was leaving the hospital after a particularly brutal shift. 2 of her young patients had taken turns for the worse when she noticed the man following her. He was subtle about it, maintaining distance, but Mila's newly developed threat awareness caught the pattern. She texted Marco immediately, one word: tail. The response came within seconds. Identified, ours. New guy on rotation. Sorry for the scare. Mila felt her heart rate slow back to normal. Just Lorenzo's security doing their job. She should be grateful for the protection, not annoyed by the constant surveillance. But sometimes, in quiet moments, she missed the anonymity of her old life. The ability to walk through the world unnoticed, unguarded, unremarkable. That night she brought it up to Lorenzo over dinner at the estate. They'd started spending weekends there, finding it easier to relax away from the city. I appreciate the security. I understand why it's necessary. Mila pushed pasta around her plate. But sometimes I feel like I'm living in a gilded cage, like I can't breathe without someone watching, reporting back, analyzing my every move. Lorenzo set down his fork, his expression serious. I can reduce the visible presence, make the security more subtle. It's not about seeing them or not seeing them, it's about freedom. Mila met his eyes. I chose this life. I chose you. But I'm struggling with what that choice cost. What do you need? The question was simple, direct, and so characteristically Lorenzo that Mila felt her throat tighten. He wasn't dismissing her concerns or defending his methods. He was asking what she needed and preparing to provide it. I need to feel like I still have autonomy, like my choices matter beyond the boundaries you've established for my safety. Mila reached across the table for his hand. I need you to trust that I can assess risks and make decisions without constant oversight. Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. I trust you completely. It's everyone else I don't trust. Every enemy who might see you as leverage, every opportunist who might try to use you against me. I know, and I'm not asking you to eliminate security entirely. I'm asking you to give me room to breathe within it. What would that look like practically? Mila hadn't expected the question to be so direct or so genuine. She considered it carefully. Less visible surveillance at the hospital, more freedom to run errands or meet friends without a full security briefing, the ability to make spontaneous decisions without clearing them through Marco first. I can agree to most of that. But some things are non-negotiable. You carry the panic button at all times. You don't go to unfamiliar places alone. And you tell me or Marco if you're changing your routine significantly. Lorenzo squeezed her hand. Your safety isn't something I'm willing to compromise on, Mila. Not even to make you more comfortable. I know. And she did know. The protectiveness that sometimes felt suffocating came from the same place as Lorenzo's loyalty and devotion. She couldn't have one without the other. They worked out the details over the next hour, establishing boundaries that gave Mila more independence while maintaining the security framework that let Lorenzo sleep at night. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. A compromise built on mutual understanding and the recognition that their relationship required constant negotiation. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. During a charity gala Lorenzo had been invited to attend. It was a legitimate event, fundraising for children's medical research. And Lorenzo's attendance was both a business obligation and a genuine interest given Mila's work. "Come with me," he'd said when the invitation arrived. "It's time to stop hiding our relationship from the world." Mila had understood immediately what he was really asking. Going public meant confirming to everyone, Lorenzo's allies, his enemies, Chicago's social elite, that she mattered to him. That she was the one person who had claimed the heart of the city's most dangerous man. The gala was held at one of Chicago's most exclusive hotels, the ballroom glittering with crystal and candlelight. Mila wore a dress Lorenzo had insisted on buying, emerald silk that matched his eyes, elegant without being ostentatious. She felt exposed and powerful in equal measure as they entered together, Lorenzo's hand warm and possessive at the small of her back. The room noticed immediately. Conversations paused. Eyes tracked their movement. Mila felt the weight of hundreds of gazes and refused to shrink under the scrutiny. "They're staring," she murmured to Lorenzo. "Let them." His voice was low and proud. "Let them see that Lorenzo Moretti has found something worth more than power or money or control." They moved through the crowd together, Lorenzo introducing her to business associates and social contacts with casual possessiveness. Mila recognized some names from news reports: politicians, corporate executives, people who operated in the gray areas between legitimate business and criminal enterprise. The evening was proceeding smoothly until a woman in her 40s approached them, her expression calculated and cold. "Lorenzo, how unexpected to see you at a children's charity event." Her tone suggested she found his presence anywhere near children darkly ironic. "And with such lovely company. Won't you introduce us?" "Senator Morrison." Lorenzo's voice was carefully neutral. "This is Mila Carter, head of pediatric oncology at Chicago Memorial." "How fascinating." The senator's gaze raked over Mila with barely disguised contempt. "Tell me, Miss Carter, do you find it difficult to reconcile your work helping children with your relationship with a man whose business destroys families?" The room around them had gone quiet, people sensing confrontation and drawing closer to witness it. Mila felt Lorenzo tense beside her, felt his protective instincts surge. But this was her moment, her choice how to respond. "My work is helping children survive cancer," Mila said, her voice clear and steady. "Many of those children come from families who can't afford treatment, who slip through the cracks of our healthcare system. Lorenzo has personally funded treatment for 3 of my patients this year. So yes, Senator, I can reconcile my work with my relationship. Can you reconcile your position on healthcare reform with the fact that you voted against expanding coverage for pediatric cancer treatments?" The senator's face flushed red. Lorenzo's hand tightened on Mila's back, pride and surprise and something that felt like joy. "That's an oversimplification of a complex issue. Is it? Because I have families in my ward right now choosing between rent and their child's chemotherapy. Your vote contributed to that choice." Mila took a step forward, channeling every ounce of frustration she'd accumulated from 3 years of watching children suffer because of political failures. "So before you judge my choices, Senator, perhaps examine your own." The senator turned and walked away without another word. The crowd around them erupted into whispered conversations, and Mila felt her heart hammering with the audacity of what she'd just done. Lorenzo guided her toward a quieter corner, his expression unreadable until they were alone. Then he smiled, genuinely, beautifully, and pulled her into a kiss that made her forget they were in public. "You're magnificent," he said when they finally broke apart. "Absolutely magnificent. I probably just made us a powerful enemy." "Worth it. Besides, Senator Morrison has been trying to use healthcare reform as a platform to target organized crime funding. This was inevitable." Lorenzo's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Though I'll admit, I didn't expect you to eviscerate her quite so effectively." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Mila found herself talking with the hospital's board chairman, with other doctors and nurses from different departments, with people who seemed genuinely interested in her work rather than just her connection to Lorenzo. By the time they left, near midnight, Mila felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. They'd done it, gone public, confirmed to Chicago's elite and underworld alike that Mila Carter and Lorenzo Moretti were together, were serious, were choosing each other despite all the reasons they shouldn't. In the car on the way back to the estate, Lorenzo was quieter than usual. Mila watched the city lights blur past and wondered what he was thinking. "Regrets?" she finally asked. "About tonight? None. Lorenzo turned to face her. But watching you stand up to Morrison, watching you defend your work with such passion, it reminded me that you have a life and purpose that exists entirely separate from my world, that you could have chosen someone safer, easier, less complicated. I don't want safe or easy. Mila took his hand, threading their fingers together. I want you, want this, want to build something real from the unlikely foundation of a promise made to my mother 12 years ago. Even knowing what it costs, the security, the scrutiny, the constant awareness that you're a target because of me? Even knowing all of that. Mila leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm not naive, Lorenzo. I understand the risks, but I also understand what I gain. You, partnership with someone who sees me completely, a life that matters in ways I never imagined. Lorenzo pressed a kiss to her hair. I love you. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. I love you too, even when you're impossible and overprotective and running criminal enterprises that I pretend not to know about. His quiet laugh rumbled through his chest. Fair enough. The following weeks brought consequences from the gala that Mila hadn't fully anticipated. The hospital board chairman called her in for a private meeting where he carefully danced around questions about Lorenzo's business interests and whether they might create conflicts with Mila's new role as department head. She'd handled it with the same directness she'd used with Senator Morrison, acknowledging that Lorenzo's world was complicated while emphasizing that her work and personal life remained separate. She'd gotten the sense the chairman had expected evasion or defensiveness. Her honesty seemed to disarm him entirely. Meanwhile, Lorenzo's organization watched Mila with new respect. She'd stood up to a senator at a public event, had claimed her place beside Lorenzo without apology or hesitation. Marco told her with obvious approval that the men were calling her the boss's queen, a title that should have made her uncomfortable but instead felt strangely right. One evening, as Mila and Lorenzo were having dinner at her apartment, his phone buzzed with a message that made his expression darken. What's wrong? Thomas Carter filed a lawsuit, claims I kidnapped you, that you're being held against your will, that he wants custody proceedings to ensure your safety. Lorenzo's voice dripped with contempt. It's a transparent attempt to extort money, but it's going to require legal resources to shut down. Mila felt cold fury replace her initial shock. After everything, after you gave him money and a fresh start, he's still trying to hurt me? He's desperate and stupid, a dangerous combination. Lorenzo was already texting his lawyers. I'll handle this. He won't get anywhere near you. No. Mila stood, decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. I'll handle this. I'll give a deposition, provide medical records from the night he broke my arm, detail years of abuse. I'll make it very clear that I chose to leave and that any suggestion I'm being held against my will is categorically false. Lorenzo looked at her with something like awe. You're sure? I'm sure. Thomas has controlled enough of my life. I'm not letting him have any more power over me. Mila's voice was steady, certain, and maybe it's time the world knew exactly what kind of man he is. The legal proceedings took 3 weeks. Mila gave her deposition with clinical precision, detailing years of verbal and physical abuse with the same calm she used when documenting patient symptoms. She provided medical records, testimony from Sarah Chen about the night she'd arrived at the hospital with a broken arm, and a statement from Dr. Ross about the extent of her injuries. Thomas's lawsuit fell apart under the weight of evidence. His lawyer withdrew from the case. And Thomas himself, facing potential charges for filing a frivolous lawsuit and renewed questions about domestic abuse, accepted a settlement that required him to never contact Mila again and to publicly acknowledge his previous abuse. Lorenzo had wanted him prosecuted fully. Mila had argued for closure instead of revenge. In the end, her will had prevailed. Thomas's public admission and permanent exile from her life was enough. The night the settlement was finalized, Mila stood in the estate's gardens, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Lorenzo found her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind. It's over, he said quietly. Thomas is out of your life permanently this time. I know, Mila leaned back against his chest. I thought I'd feel different, triumphant maybe. Instead, I just feel tired and ready to move forward. Then we move forward. Lorenzo turned her in his arms to face him. Together, whatever that looks like. Mila looked up at the man who'd changed her life in ways she was still discovering. The criminal who kept his promises. The protector who'd given her freedom. The complicated, dangerous, surprisingly gentle person who'd seen past her invisibility and decided she was worth everything. Together, she agreed. And in that moment, standing in gardens that had become home, wrapped in the arms of Chicago's most dangerous man, Mila Carter felt something she'd spent 24 years searching for without knowing what she needed. She felt whole. The wholeness didn't last. 3 days after Thomas's final defeat, Mila was reviewing patient charts in her new office, still adjusting to the title department head on her door, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then instinct made her pick up. "Miss Carter?" The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. "This is Special Agent Rebecca Walsh with the FBI. I need to speak with you about Lorenzo Moretti." Mila's blood turned to ice. "I have nothing to say to you." "I think you do. We have evidence of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Your testimony could help us build a case that finally puts Moretti away for life." Agent Walsh's tone softened slightly. "I know he's convinced you he's protecting you, but men like him don't protect, they possess. They control. And eventually, they destroy everyone around them. You don't know anything about him. I know he's a criminal. I know his organization is responsible for violence across this city, and I know you're a good person who's gotten tangled up in something dangerous." Walsh paused. "Meet with me. One conversation. If you still want to walk away after that, I'll respect it, but at least hear what we know." Mila ended the call without responding. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to set down the phone. This was the nightmare scenario Lorenzo had warned her about. Federal investigation, pressure to testify, the government trying to use her as leverage against him. She should tell Lorenzo immediately. Should let him handle it with his lawyers and his resources, and his careful navigation of legal boundaries. Instead, she sat in her office staring at her phone and wondering what evidence the FBI actually had. Wondering if the man she loved was guilty of things even worse than she'd imagined. The thought felt like betrayal. But it was there, planted by Agent Walsh's words, growing roots in the fertile soil of Mila's uncertainty. She made it through the rest of her shift on autopilot, caring for her patients with professional competence while her mind spun through impossible scenarios. That evening, instead of going home to the apartment where Lorenzo would be waiting, she drove to the lake and parked along the shore. The water was dark and restless, matching her mood. Mila sat in her car and tried to reconcile the man who'd saved her from Thomas with the man the FBI was investigating for murder. Tried to separate the Lorenzo who funded cancer treatments for children from the Lorenzo who ordered violence against his enemies. They were the same person. She'd always known that. But knowing it intellectually and confronting it through federal investigation were entirely different things. Her phone buzzed. "Lorenzo, where are you? Marco says you left the hospital an hour ago." Mila stared at the message, feeling the weight of surveillance even in this moment of solitude. She could lie, could say she needed time alone, could put off this conversation until she'd figured out what she actually wanted to say. Instead, she sent him her location. Lorenzo arrived 20 minutes later, alone for once, driving himself in a dark sedan instead of the usual SUV with security detail. He slid into the passenger seat, and for a long moment they just sat together watching the lake. "The FBI called," Mila finally said. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but she felt him tense. "What did they want?" "My testimony. They say they have evidence of racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder." Mila turned to face him. "They want to use me to put you away for life." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I hung up." Mila's throat felt tight, but she planted questions I can't ignore. "What evidence do they have, Lorenzo? What have you done that I don't know about?" Lorenzo was quiet for so long that Mila thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "I've done terrible things. Ordered violence against people who threatened my organization, laundered money through legitimate businesses, built an empire on activities that violate dozens of laws." He met her eyes. "I've never lied to you about what I am, Mila, but I've also never detailed the specifics because some knowledge is a burden you shouldn't carry. The FBI thinks they can prove murder. They probably can, not directly. I'm too careful for that. But conspiracy, ordering hits, creating the circumstances that led to deaths? Yes, that evidence exists if they look hard enough. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. The question is whether they can get it admitted in court, whether their witnesses will survive to testify, whether their investigation can withstand the legal challenges my lawyers will mount. You're talking about intimidating witnesses, destroying evidence. I'm talking about survival, about protecting what's mine. Lorenzo turned to face her fully. I won't apologize for the life I've led or the choices I've made, but I will tell you this. If the FBI builds a case against me, if this goes to trial, you need to stay as far away from it as possible. They'll subpoena me. Then you invoke your Fifth Amendment rights. You refuse to testify. You let my lawyers handle the legal strategy. Lorenzo's voice intensified. I won't let them use you against me, Mila. I won't let you be destroyed by my world. What if I want to testify? The question hung between them like a blade. Lorenzo's expression shuddered, going cold and distant in a way that reminded Mila of exactly who she was dealing with. Then you testify, he said quietly. I won't stop you, won't threaten you or try to control your choices. But understand that once you cross that line, there's no coming back. The life we've built ends. The protection I provide ends. You become just another witness in a federal case, and my organization will treat you accordingly. You mean they'll kill me? I mean I won't be able to stop them even if I wanted to. Lorenzo's voice was bleak. The moment you testify against me, you stop being under my protection, and there are people in my organization who would see you as a threat that needs to be eliminated. Mila felt tears sting her eyes. So my choices are lie for you or die for telling the truth. Your choices are to refuse to participate in a federal investigation that's trying to use you as a weapon, or to become an active participant in destroying me and accept the consequences. Lorenzo reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I'm not asking you to lie, Mila. I'm asking you to protect yourself by staying out of something that will consume you. You're asking me to choose you over justice. I'm asking you to choose your own survival over abstract principles that won't matter when you're dead or in witness protection, spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. The brutal honesty was somehow worse than deception would have been. Mila stared at the man she loved and saw the reality of his world laid bare. Violence, moral compromise, survival purchased through terrible choices. I need time to think, she whispered. Take all the time you need. But Mila, Lorenzo's voice broke slightly. Whatever you decide, know that I love you. That's real. That's true. Everything else is complicated and morally ambiguous and probably indefensible. But what I feel for you is the most honest thing in my life. He left her sitting by the lake, drove away in the dark sedan, and Mila was alone with her impossible choice. She drove home to her apartment but couldn't bring herself to go inside. Instead, she called Sarah and asked to meet at their favorite coffee shop, neutral territory, public enough to feel safe. Sarah took one look at Mila's face and ordered 2 large coffees without asking. They sat in a corner booth, and Mila found herself telling the whole story. Lorenzo, the protection, the relationship, and now the FBI investigation. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through shock, concern, and something that might have been understanding. So let me get this straight, Sarah said when Mila finally ran out of words. You're in love with a mafia boss who saved you from your abusive stepfather. You've been living in his world for months, and now the FBI wants you to help put him in prison. That's the summary, yes. And you're considering testifying. I'm considering doing the right thing. Mila wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. He's a criminal, Sarah. He's hurt people, killed people, probably. How do I justify protecting him? How do you justify destroying the man who saved your life? Sarah countered. I'm not saying what he does is right, Mila. I'm saying this isn't a simple moral equation. He protected you when no one else did. He gave you safety, resources, genuine care. That has to count for something. So I should ignore his crimes because he was good to me? I'm saying you should think carefully about whether testifying will actually serve justice or just destroy your life along with his. Sarah leaned forward. The FBI doesn't care about you, Mila. They care about closing a case. If they get Lorenzo, great. If you become collateral damage in the process, that's an acceptable loss to them. The words echoed what Lorenzo had said, and Mila hated that they made sense. She wanted clear moral lines, obvious right choices. Instead, She had only murky compromises and impossible decisions. Over the next week, Mila functioned in a fog of uncertainty. She went to work, cared for her patients, attended meetings about department protocols, but her mind was constantly elsewhere, turning over the FBI's offer, Lorenzo's warning, her own moral framework. Lorenzo gave her space, communicating only through brief texts, checking on her safety. The apartment felt empty without him, but Mila needed the solitude to think clearly. On the 8th day, Agent Walsh called again. "Have you considered my offer, Miss Carter?" "I'm still thinking about it." "Then let me help clarify your thinking." Walsh's tone sharpened. "We have testimony from 3 separate witnesses placing Lorenzo Moretti at a warehouse in the industrial district the night Victor Kozlov's second-in-command disappeared. We have financial records showing money laundering through 12 different businesses. We have wiretaps discussing violence against rival organizations." Mila's stomach dropped. "That's not enough for a conviction." "It's enough to build toward one. And your testimony about the night Marco was shot, about the security measures, about Lorenzo's organization structure, that fills in gaps that make our case much stronger." Walsh paused. "You have a chance to help us stop a man who's caused immeasurable damage to this city. Don't throw that away because you've convinced yourself he loves you." "He does love me." "Maybe he does. But love doesn't excuse murder, Miss Carter, and it doesn't justify letting him continue hurting people." After Walsh hung up, Mila sat in her office staring at nothing. The agent was right. Love didn't excuse Lorenzo's crimes, but it also didn't make the choice to betray him any easier. That evening, she drove to the estate for the first time in over a week. Lorenzo met her at the door, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying his hope and fear. "I need to understand," Mila said without preamble. "I need you to tell me everything the FBI might have evidence of. Not vague admissions, specific acts. I need to know exactly what I'd be protecting if I refused to testify." Lorenzo studied her face, then nodded. "Come to my study. This conversation requires privacy." They sat across from each other in the room where Mila had once helped save Marco's life, and Lorenzo began talking. He detailed organizational structure, money laundering operations, territorial disputes that had turned violent. He described ordering Marco to eliminate threats, arranging for witnesses to disappear, using legitimate businesses as fronts for criminal activity. He didn't minimize or justify. He simply stated facts with the clinical precision of someone presenting evidence. By the time he finished, over an hour had passed. Mila felt sick with the weight of knowledge she now carried. 3 people are dead because of orders I gave," Lorenzo concluded. "Dozens more have been hurt, intimidated, driven out of Chicago. I've laundered approximately $40 million through various businesses over the past 5 years. The FBI probably has evidence of half of it if they've been investigating as thoroughly as it sounds." "Why are you telling me this?" Mila's voice was barely above a whisper. "You're giving me everything I'd need to testify against you. Because you deserve the truth. Because you asked for it. And because if you're going to make this choice, you should do it with full knowledge of what you're choosing." Lorenzo's expression was bleak. "I won't manipulate you with partial information or strategic omissions. You wanted to know what the FBI might prove. Now you know." Mila stood and walked to the window, staring out at the gardens she'd come to love. "You killed 3 people." "Yes." "Were they innocent?" 2 were members of rival organizations who were actively trying to kill me and my men. The 3rd was an informant preparing to testify against my organization. None were civilians. All knew the risks of the life they'd chosen." "That doesn't make it right." "No," Lorenzo agreed. "It doesn't. But it was necessary for survival in the world I inhabit." Mila turned to face him. "If you could go back, would you make different choices? Would you choose a legitimate life instead of this?" Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. "I can't answer that honestly without lying to you. The life I've led made me who I am. The choices I've made brought me to the moment 12 years ago when your mother saved me. They brought me to you. If I'd chosen differently, I'd be a different person, and that different person might never have kept his promise to Elena." "So you'd do it all again?" "I'd do it all again to end up here, with you, having this conversation." Lorenzo stood and crossed to her. "But I'd also change specific choices if I could. I'd find ways to protect my organization without killing. I'd seek legitimate power instead of criminal control. I'd be worthy of the faith your mother had in me when she decided I was worth saving. Mila looked up at him, seeing the complexity she'd always known was there, but had avoided examining too closely. I don't know if I can live with what you've done. I know. But I also don't know if I can testify against you, if I can be the reason you spend the rest of your life in prison. That's not a decision you need to make right now. Yes, it is. Mila took a deep breath. Agent Walsh wants an answer by the end of the week. She says if I commit to testifying, they'll offer protection, relocation, everything I'd need to start over. They're probably not lying about that, Lorenzo said quietly. The FBI is good at witness protection when they want to be. You'd let me go? Just like that? I'd hate it. I'd spend the rest of my life missing you and regretting that I brought you into a world that forced this choice. Lorenzo's hand cupped her face with heartbreaking tenderness. But yes, I'd let you go. Your freedom has always been more important than my happiness. Mila leaned into his touch, memorizing the feel of his hand against her skin. I love you. That hasn't changed. But I don't know if love is enough to justify the choices I'd have to make to stay. Then you have your answer. Do I? They stood together in the fading light, and Mila felt the full weight of her crossroads. She could choose Lorenzo, choose love and protection and moral compromise, or she could choose justice, whatever that meant in this context, and walk away from everything they'd built together. Neither choice was right. Neither was clearly wrong. Both would cost her something essential. That night, Mila slept alone in her apartment and dreamed of her mother. Elena appeared as she'd been before the cancer, healthy and vibrant, sitting in Mila's childhood kitchen. You saved him, Mila said in the dream. You knew what he was, and you saved him anyway. I saved a dying man who asked for mercy, Elena replied. What he became after that was his choice. What you choose now is yours. I don't know what to choose. Yes, you do. You've always known. You're just afraid of the consequences. Mila woke with tears on her face and clarity in her heart. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, she called Agent Walsh. I've made my decision. I'll meet with you one time, but I'm not promising testimony. I'm promising a conversation. They met in a federal building downtown, in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and institutional anxiety. Agent Walsh was there with her partner, both wearing expressions of professional neutrality. Thank you for coming, Miss Carter. I came to tell you that I won't be testifying against Lorenzo Moretti. Mila's voice was steady, certain. I understand you're building a case. I understand you think my testimony would help, but I'm invoking my right to refuse cooperation. Walsh's expression hardened. You realize we can subpoena you, compel your testimony. Then I'll plead the fifth, claim that testifying might incriminate me given my proximity to Lorenzo's operations. Mila met the agent's eyes. I've consulted with a lawyer. I know my options, and I'm choosing not to participate in your investigation. Even knowing what he's done, the people he's hurt, I'm not defending his actions. I'm refusing to be your weapon against him. Mila stood. If you have evidence of crimes, charge him. Build your case with witnesses who aren't being coerced, but leave me out of it. She walked out before Walsh could respond, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The choice was made. The path was clear. Whatever consequences followed, at least she'd chosen them consciously. Lorenzo was waiting in her apartment when she returned home. He stood as she entered, his expression carefully controlled. I told the FBI no, Mila said without preamble. I'm not testifying. I'm not cooperating with their investigation. I'm choosing you. The relief that crossed Lorenzo's face was almost painful to witness. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You're sure? I'm sure. This isn't justice. It's weaponizing my relationship with you. That's not something I'm willing to participate in. Mila pulled back to look at him. But I need something from you in return. Anything. I need you to start transitioning to legitimate business. Not overnight, not all at once, but I need to see you moving towards something that doesn't require violence and moral compromise. Mila's voice was firm. I'm choosing to stay. I'm choosing you. But I need to know you're choosing to be better than what circumstances made you. Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. That's not a simple transition. The organization, the territories, the agreements. I'm not asking for simple. I'm asking for effort, for genuine commitment to building something that doesn't depend on hurting people. Mila touched his face. You told me once that you became the boss so you could make the organization less monstrous. Prove it. Show me you meant it. It could take years, decades even. Then we have time to figure it out together. Lorenzo kissed her then, and Mila tasted relief and promise and the beginning of something that might eventually resemble redemption. Over the following months, Lorenzo began the slow, complex process of transitioning his operations toward legitimacy. He invested heavily in real estate development, restaurants, and security consulting, businesses that could eventually absorb his organization's infrastructure without the criminal activities. It wasn't clean, it wasn't fast, and it required navigating complex relationships with people who didn't want change. But Lorenzo approached it with the same strategic thinking he'd applied to building his empire, and gradually, the balance began to shift. Meanwhile, Mila threw herself into her work at the hospital. She established new protocols for family support, created programs to help low-income families access treatment, and worked with Lorenzo to quietly fund initiatives that made real differences in her patients' lives. The FBI investigation continued, but without Mila's testimony and with Lorenzo's careful legal maneuvering, it stalled. Eventually, the focus shifted to other cases, other criminals. The threat didn't disappear entirely, but it faded into background noise. 6 months after Mila's choice, Lorenzo took her back to the estate for a quiet Sunday evening. They walked through the gardens as sunset painted the sky, and Lorenzo stopped beside the fountain where they'd first discussed his mother. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Mila's breath caught. Lorenzo, it's not what you think. Or maybe it is, but not in the traditional sense. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold locket on a chain. This belonged to your mother. She was wearing it the night she saved my life. I had it cleaned and repaired. Inside is a photo of you as a child, one she showed me before she left me at the doctor's office. Mila took the locket with trembling hands. The gold was warm against her palm, worn smooth by years of her mother wearing it. She opened it and saw herself at maybe 10 years old, grinning at the camera with gap-toothed joy. She made me promise to protect you, Lorenzo continued, but she also made me promise something else. She said, if my daughter ever finds her way to you, if she chooses to stay in your world despite everything it costs, you give her this. You remind her that I saw your potential for goodness, and I trusted her to see it too. Tears streamed down Mila's face. You've been carrying this for 12 years? Waiting for the right moment to give it to you? Lorenzo fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers gentle. I think this is that moment. You chose to stay. You chose to believe I could be better than my worst actions. You chose to trust the same potential your mother saw in me all those years ago. Mila touched the locket, feeling her mother's presence and the weight of gold against her skin. She'd be proud of what you're building, of who you're becoming. She'd be proud of you, of the woman you've become despite everything life threw at you, of the courage it took to choose this path. Lorenzo pulled her close. I love you, Mila Carter. Not because you saved me from loneliness or gave me purpose, but because you see all of me, the good and the terrible, and you choose to stay anyway. I love you too, even when you're impossible and dangerous and making me complicit in moral ambiguity. His quiet laugh rumbled through his chest. Fair enough. They stood together as the sun set over the gardens, two unlikely people who'd built something real from the foundation of a promise made in desperation 12 years ago. The future was still uncertain. The path toward legitimacy would be long and complicated, and Mila would probably spend the rest of her life navigating the gray areas between justice and love, between the person she'd been and the person she was becoming. But here, in this moment, with her mother's locket warm against her skin and Lorenzo's arms around her, Mila felt something profound settle in her chest. She felt chosen. Not rescued or protected or saved, but genuinely chosen by someone who understood exactly who she was and loved her anyway. And she had chosen him in return, not blindly, not naively, but with full knowledge of what that choice cost and what it promised. The hospital board formally appointed Mila as permanent department head 3 weeks later. She threw herself into the work with renewed purpose, using Lorenzo's resources and connections to expand programs that made real differences. She established a foundation, funded anonymously through Lorenzo's legitimate businesses, that covered treatment costs for families who couldn't afford them. The children she helped would never know that their care was funded by a man trying to atone for violence through targeted generosity. Mila was okay with that. Redemption didn't require recognition. It required consistent effort toward being better than you were yesterday. One evening, nearly a year after she'd chosen to stay, Mila was reviewing patient files when Sarah appeared in her office doorway. "Big news," Sarah announced, settling into the visitor's chair. "Senator Morrison's healthcare reform bill just passed committee. It includes expanded coverage for pediatric cancer treatment." Mila looked up in surprise. The one she opposed last year. Apparently, your very public confrontation at the charity gala made her rethink her position, combined with pressure from advocacy groups and some surprisingly effective lobbying from anonymous donors. Sarah's smile was knowing. Any idea who might have funded that lobbying effort? Mila thought of Lorenzo, who'd asked her months ago what kind of change she wanted to see in healthcare, who'd listened carefully as she'd explained the gaps in coverage that forced families into impossible choices, who'd apparently decided that funding political advocacy was a better use of resources than some of his previous activities. "No idea," she said, but she was smiling. That night, she found Lorenzo in his study at the estate, reviewing paperwork that looked blessedly legal and boring. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing a kiss to his neck. "Senator Morrison's bill is moving forward, the one that expands pediatric cancer coverage." "I heard. Good news for your patients." Lorenzo's tone was casual, but Mila caught the satisfaction beneath it. "Thank you for the lobbying effort, for using your influence for something that actually helps people." "I have no idea what you're talking about." But he was smiling as he turned to pull her into his lap. Though hypothetically, if someone with resources and connections wanted to support healthcare reform, it would be a reasonable use of those resources. Hypothetically. Mila kissed him, tasting the future they were building together. Imperfect, complicated, built on foundations that would never be entirely clean but were getting steadier with each passing day. 2 years after the night Lorenzo had found her broken in a hospital parking lot, Mila stood in the estate's gardens surrounded by people who'd become family. Marco was there, fully recovered, and recently promoted to Lorenzo's chief of security. Maria was there with her husband, beaming with the pride of someone who'd watched two unlikely people build something real. Dr. Ross was there. Sarah was there. Even the hospital board chairman was there, looking mildly uncomfortable, but genuinely pleased. It wasn't a wedding. Neither Mila nor Lorenzo felt the need for legal complications given the nature of his business. But it was a commitment ceremony, a public acknowledgement of what they'd built together, of the choice they renewed every day to stay and fight for something better. Lorenzo stood beside her in the fading sunlight, and when he spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "You saved me without knowing it. Not from physical death. Your mother did that. But from spiritual death. From becoming so consumed by what I do that I forgot who I wanted to be. You gave me reason to be better, purpose beyond power. You chose to stay when you could have run, and that choice changed everything." Mila's turn. She looked into green eyes that had terrified her once and now felt like home. "You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me freedom when I'd forgotten what it felt like. You kept a promise to my mother, and in doing so, you gave me back the future she wanted me to have." Her voice strengthened. "I choose you, today, tomorrow, every day after. Not because you're perfect, but because you're trying. Not because our path is easy, but because it's ours." They exchanged the rings Marco presented, simple gold bands that spoke of commitment without legal entanglement, and when Lorenzo kissed her, Mila heard their gathered friends cheer. Later, after the celebration had quieted and guests had departed, Mila and Lorenzo walked alone through the gardens. The night was clear, stars visible, despite Chicago's light pollution, and everything felt suspended in perfect possibility. "Do you ever regret it?" Lorenzo asked quietly. "Choosing this life instead of the safe, normal existence you could have had?" Mila touched the locket she wore always now, her mother's final gift and blessing. "I regret that the world is complicated enough to make this choice necessary. I regret that you've had to do terrible things to survive. But I don't regret choosing you. Choosing us. Choosing to believe that people can be better than their worst moments. Even when those moments include murder and moral compromise? Even then, Mila stopped walking, turning to face him. You're not just your worst actions, Lorenzo. You're also the man who kept a promise for 12 years, who funds cancer treatment for children who'll never know your name, who's spending his fortune and influence transitioning an entire criminal organization toward legitimacy because I asked you to try. That transition is taking longer than I'd hoped. All worthwhile things do. Mila took his hand. We have time, and we have each other. That's enough. They stood together in the gardens where so much of their relationship had unfolded, and Mila thought about the journey that had brought her here. From invisible nurse to department head. From abuse victim to woman who'd faced down Russian mobsters. From someone who survived to someone who thrived. Lorenzo had catalyzed that transformation, but he hadn't created it. The strength had always been there, buried under years of being told she didn't matter. He'd simply seen it and refused to let her hide from her own potential. In the distance, Chicago's skyline glittered against the night sky. A city that held both their pasts and their futures, that had witnessed violence and redemption, that continued indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding within it. Somewhere in that city, children slept in hospital beds, fighting battles no child should face. Families made impossible choices between rent and treatment. Systems failed the most vulnerable, and people like Senator Morrison slowly, grudgingly, moved toward better policy. And in one corner of that vast urban landscape, two unlikely people had built something real, something that wouldn't exist without a promise made 12 years ago, without a nurse's compassion and a criminal's unexpected capacity for devotion. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't clean or simple or free from moral complexity, but it was theirs. Mila looked up at the man who'd changed her life in ways she was still discovering, who'd given her freedom and purpose and love that felt as solid as the ground beneath her feet. Take me home, she said. Lorenzo smiled, understanding that home meant both the estate and wherever they were together. Always. They walked hand in hand through gardens that had witnessed their evolution from protector and protected to partners building something neither could have created alone. The future stretched ahead, complicated, uncertain, full of challenges they'd face together. But tonight, under stars that had witnessed every human drama since the beginning of time, Mila Carter and Lorenzo Moretti were simply two people who'd chosen each other against all odds and kept choosing each other every day after. And that choice, renewed again and again, was the closest thing to redemption either of them would ever find. The story that began with a broken arm and a promise made to a dying woman had transformed into something neither Elena Russo nor her daughter could have anticipated. But as Mila touched the locket her mother had worn, the locket that had traveled through 12 years and countless complications to find its way home, she felt her mother's blessing in the weight of gold against her skin. Elena had seen potential in a bleeding criminal and chosen mercy. Mila had seen complexity in a dangerous man and chosen love. Both choices had rippled outward, creating consequences neither woman could have predicted. Some of those consequences were beautiful, some were morally ambiguous, all were undeniably real. And as Mila fell asleep that night in Lorenzo's arms, the locket warm against her heart, she knew with perfect certainty that she'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the safe choice, not even necessarily the morally defensible choice, but hers. And in a world that had spent so long telling her she didn't matter, that her choices were irrelevant, that her voice was too quiet to be heard, choosing herself, choosing her own path, choosing love over fear, was the most radical thing she could have done. The most dangerous man in Chicago had given her that gift, had seen her potential and refused to let her settle for invisible survival. And Mila Carter, department head of pediatric oncology at Chicago Memorial Hospital, partner to a criminal trying to become something better, daughter of a woman who'd saved a life and changed everything. Mila Carter had chosen to be extraordinary. Not despite the complications, because of them.